Hey there, story lovers! This is Monkey D. FIC, and we're bringing you an epic adventure. What if Nami confessed her love to Luffy? Hit like, subscribe, and let's begin this journey. Chapter 1. The moment before the storm. The sky had been lying all day. Nami knew it the way she knew most things, not from books, not from instruments alone, but from something older and more instinctive. A feeling she'd developed growing up on an island that the sea had never quite loved. The clouds to the west were the wrong shade of purple. The wind had that particular stillness that wasn't peaceful at all. It was the stillness of something holding its breath. She'd updated her charts 3 times since noon, and each update pushed the storm's arrival closer, and now, standing at the bow of the Thousand Sunny in the last light of the evening, she was doing the math again in her head and not liking the answer she kept arriving at. 2 hours, she said to nobody. 2 hours until what? Chopper called from behind her. He was sitting on the deck with a medical textbook open across his hooves, though she was fairly certain he'd been watching the clouds instead of reading for the past 20 minutes. Until we get soaked. Chopper looked at the sky. The sky, to an untrained eye, looked perfectly fine, deep orange at the horizon, a few harmless-looking clouds scattered around, the first stars beginning to show themselves in the east. It doesn't look like a storm. It never does, Nami said. That's the point. She turned away from the bow and walked back toward the helm, pulling her orange hair back and twisting it into a loose knot at the nape of her neck. The Sunny's deck was alive with the comfortable noise of evening. Frankie was somewhere below doing something that involved rhythmic metallic banging. Usopp was repainting a patch on the mast where the wood had started to show. Brooke was playing something slow and melancholy on his violin near the stern. And Robin was in her usual spot by the railing with a book in her lap and a kind of expression that suggested she was reading every word while simultaneously being aware of everything happening within 30 meters of her. Zoro was asleep against the main mast. Obviously. Nami stopped at the helm, checked her heading against the log pose, made a small correction, and looked at the barometer mounted beside the wheel. The mercury had dropped 4 points since her last reading. She tapped it twice with her finger. It dropped another half point while she watched. Okay, she said quietly. Maybe an hour and a half. Nami Swan! Sanji materialized from the galley hatchway with the particular teleportation ability that he seemed to save exclusively for moments when Nami was near a door. He was carrying a small tray with a cup of tea on it, steam curling up into the cooling evening air. I made chamomile. I noticed you've been on deck since the afternoon, and I thought, is Luffy eating dinner without asking for thirds? Sanji blinked. He's already asked for thirds. Then go back inside. She took the tea. Thank you. Sanji performed the small ritual devastation he always performed when she thanked him for anything, hand over heart, slight lean against the galley door frame, eyes briefly becoming cartoon spirals, and then he was gone again, because whatever was happening in the kitchen was apparently capable of pulling him back even from the gravitational field of Nami's presence. She drank the tea standing at the helm, watching the western horizon. The purple was getting deeper. Dinner was loud in the way Straw Hat dinners were always loud, which was to say it sounded less like a meal and more like a minor natural disaster happening inside a kitchen. Luffy had gotten to force by the time Nami sat down, and Sanji was managing the situation with the particular exhausted professionalism of someone who had accepted his fate long ago. The table was crammed with people and food and elbows and the ongoing argument between Usopp and Chopper about whether the island they were heading toward had any documented cases of the disease Chopper had been reading about, which Usopp was insisting it definitely did and Chopper was insisting it definitely didn't, and neither of them had any actual evidence either way. Robin was listening to both of them with the faint smile she wore when she was deciding whether to resolve an argument, or let it run its natural course, which in this case appeared to be the latter. There's a storm coming, Nami said, not loudly, but she had developed over years of living with these people a specific register that cut through any level of ambient chaos. Conversation dropped. How bad? Zoro asked from across the table. He hadn't looked up from his food, but his hand had moved slightly away from his cup, a small, unconscious gesture the nautical equivalent of a soldier shifting weight onto his back foot. Bad enough that I want everyone who doesn't need to be on deck to be below deck in about an hour. She pulled her charts from beside her plate. She'd brought them to dinner, which the crew had stopped finding strange approximately 2 years ago, and spread them flat on the table with one hand, anchoring the corners with her cup and Luffy's bowl, which she'd taken while he was looking the other way. The system is moving faster than the standard models suggest. The Grand Line doesn't care about standard models, obviously, but this one is moving in a pattern I haven't seen before. The pressure drop is steep and it's been accelerating since this afternoon. So we go around it, Usopp said. We can't go around it. It's too wide and our log pose is locked to the next island. I'm not going to risk losing our heading trying to dodge something that's going to hit us regardless. She traced a line on the chart with her finger. What we can do is ride the leading edge and use it. If we angle correctly, the forward wind will push us faster than we've been traveling. We'll get to Murugain ahead of schedule. Murugain, Robin said, not quite as a question. She was looking at the chart with the particular quality of attention she brought to place names she recognized and wasn't sure she was happy to recognize. You know it? Nami asked. Of it, Robin said. Mostly from older texts. It has a reputation. Everything on the Grand Line has a reputation. Most of them are exaggerated. Most, Robin agreed pleasantly. Luffy had retrieved his bowl from under Nami's elbow with the casual efficiency of someone long accustomed to Nami commandeering things from within his personal space. He was eating with one arm propped on the table and the other scooping rice at a rate that suggested he wasn't really present for the conversation, but Nami had learned years ago that this was a deception. Luffy listened to everything, stored none of the details, and retained all of the meaning. He looked up at Robin. What kind of reputation? The kind, Robin said, turning a page in the book she'd apparently kept open on her lap through dinner. That makes experienced navigators change course. Nami's not changing course, Luffy said. He said it completely matter-of-factly, without looking at Nami, in the tone of someone stating a self-evident truth like the sky is blue or Zoro gets lost going in straight lines. He went back to eating. Nami looked at him for a moment. Then she rolled her charts back up. Correct, she said. The storm arrived in an hour and 12 minutes, which was 8 minutes ahead of her revised estimate, and 23 minutes ahead of the one she told the crew, which was standard practice. Always build in time for the things you can't account for. She had the crew positioned before the first real gust hit. Frankie had the sails rigged for storm configuration, which the Sunny handled with mechanical elegance, her auxiliary systems humming to life in a way that still delighted Frankie at every deployment no matter how many times they'd done it. Usopp had the loose deck items secured. Chopper was below with strict instructions to stay there unless someone needed medical attention. Robin had looked at the approaching wall of darkness on the western horizon, calmly finished the page she was reading, closed her book, and gone below without being asked, which was the most efficient form of good sense Nami had ever witnessed. Zoro had woken up approximately 90 seconds before the first wave hit, looked at the sky, looked at Nami, received a look back that communicated everything necessary, and taken position at the secondary sail control without comment. Sanji was in the galley, which during storms was where Sanji was most useful, keeping everything from flying off every surface and ensuring that there would be food and hot drinks on the other side of whatever was about to happen. Luffy was at the bow. Nami had told him to go below. He had smiled at her. She had told him more firmly. He had said it's fine, Nami, which was the response he always gave to things he had already decided were fine regardless of evidence to the contrary. She had considered this, calculated the actual risk of him being at the bow during a Grand Line storm, concluded that the risk to Luffy specifically was roughly equivalent to the risk of a storm to a rubber wall, and moved on. The first real wave came up fast and tall and dark, cresting at a height that made Usopp, who had not yet gone below, make a sound in the back of his throat like a small animal. The Sunny took it beautifully, climbing the face of it with her curved hull doing exactly what Frankie had designed it to do, the ship riding up and over with a lurch that sent your stomach somewhere behind you for a moment, and then brought it back. Nami was at the helm, feet planted wide, both hands on the wheel, reading the water the way other people read text, absorbing information in patterns, the small variations in wave direction telling her about the wind shifts still coming, the color of the foam telling her about the current beneath. She made adjustments constantly, small ones, never reactive, always a beat ahead. This was the part of her work that nobody saw unless they were paying attention, and most people weren't. Most people saw the storm. She saw the conversation she was having with the sea. The rain arrived all at once, the way it always did on the Grand Line, not building from drizzle to downpour but simply beginning, as though a decision had been made somewhere above. It was cold and hard and horizontal, and within 30 seconds everything on deck was absolutely soaked. Nami had given up keeping her hair dry approximately 2 years ago. She pushed it out of her eyes with the back of her wrist and kept her hands on the wheel. An hour in, the storm was at its worst, and she had found her rhythm with it. An hour and 20 minutes in, she heard Luffy shout. Not a shout of excitement, which was his default register. She knew all of Luffy's shouts the way you knew the voice of someone you'd spent years living 40 feet away from. This one was different. Sharp. Cut off. She locked the wheel into its temporary brace, something she almost never did, and crossed the deck in the driving rain toward the bow. The rope was trailing in the water off the port side. Luffy had been standing on the bowsprit. Of course he had been standing on the bowsprit. She was going to kill him if the ocean didn't do it first, and a wave had come in at a lateral angle that even he hadn't read correctly, and the combination of wet wood and no friction had done the rest. He was in the water. She could see him, a dark shape in the churning gray-black, his straw hat somehow still on his head, held by its cord, which said something about either physics or fate, or both. The problem was that Luffy couldn't swim. She was already moving before the thought fully completed itself. She hit the rope locker at the base of the mainmast, pulled out the throw line they kept there for exactly this reason, and had it in her hands in one motion. She wrapped the end around the cleat, took the coil in her right hand, and threw it overboard with a snap of her wrist that sent it out 12 meters into the chop, which was good. That was a throw she was proud of, and it landed 2 meters to Luffy's right, which was fine. That was fine. He just had to grab it. Luffy's arms weren't stretching. She stared. The cold rain hit her face and she stared, and the understanding arrived. Seawater. He'd gone under, the seawater had gotten into him. Even a moment of submersion in the Grand Line's deep swells was enough to start the weakness that devil fruit users suffered near the sea. He was conscious, barely, his arms moving but weakly, rubber gone rigid and heavy. "Zoro!" she screamed. But the wind took her voice and tore it sideways, and she knew before she even finished shouting that Zoro was on the other side of the ship. She looked at the rope in her hand. She looked at the water. She thought, and she was aware of thinking it very clearly and very quickly, the way her mind worked during real emergencies, that if she went in, with the waves this size and this current, there was a real chance either of them came back up. She went in anyway. The water was a physical shock, cold and dark and immediate, and it grabbed her the way the sea always grabbed people, not maliciously, just with indifference, which was somehow worse. She had the throw line still in one hand, which meant she had a tether to the ship. She had maybe 30 seconds before the cold started affecting her ability to function. She oriented herself through 3 waves, found the luminous paleness of Luffy's shirt in the dark water, and swam. She reached him and grabbed his arm. He turned his head toward her. His eyes were half open, processing slowly. Even diminished by seawater, he was heavy in a way that was hard to describe, not just physically, though he was solid in the way that someone who'd spent their life in physical training and supernatural transformation was solid, but with a kind of presence that persisted even when he was barely conscious. He recognized her. That came first, before anything else registered on his face. "Nami," he said, and swallowed seawater immediately after, which made the whole thing sound unfortunately comedic and not at all like the situation it actually was. "Don't talk," she told him. She had the line around both of them now, looped through his arm and back to her hand. "Don't do anything. Just—" She was treading water against a wave that was trying to separate them. Hold on. Luffy said, with the serene confidence of a man who had fully outsourced his continued survival to someone else. She pulled the line. The Sunny pulled back. It took 4 minutes and felt like 40. She got them both to the rope ladder on the hull and Zoro was there by then. She never found out how he'd known, whether he'd heard her or just felt it the way Zoro sometimes seemed to feel when something was wrong, and he reached down with one hand and pulled Luffy up one-handed like he weighed nothing, which frankly given what she just experienced in the water Nami found personally insulting. Then he reached down for her. She took his hand and he pulled her up onto the deck and she stood there in the rain, soaked to the bone, breathing hard, and looked at Luffy. He was sitting up on the deck already. Zoro had dropped him less than ceremoniously. The seawater was dripping off everything. His straw hat was still on his head. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't immediately categorize, not quite his usual grin, not quite the simple directness he turned on things that he found straightforwardly good. Something more careful. Like he was doing math. Nami's heart was still doing the thing hearts did after 30 seconds in dark water, convinced they might stay there. She was cold. She was soaked. Her hands were still shaking slightly from the cold, or the adrenaline, or both. She looked at him sitting there alive on the deck in the rain, straw hat and all, and something she had kept in a very specific place for a very specific reason broke loose. "I love you, you absolute idiot," she said. It came out clearly, audibly, in a gap between wind gusts, which the universe arranged specifically to ensure that the words carried. The silence was approximately 1 second long. Luffy stared at her. Zoro, standing 2 meters behind Luffy, looked at the middle distance with an expression of profound neutrality that was doing a lot of heavy lifting. Nami heard, and this was the part that she would spend the next 12 hours wishing desperately hadn't happened. She heard, from the galley hatch that Sanji had opened approximately 3 seconds ago to check on the situation, the sound of a tray falling. She looked. Sanji was standing in the galley hatch with an expression of a man who had just discovered the specific variety of heartbreak that comes not from unrequited love but from love that went somewhere else entirely while you weren't paying attention. She looked back at Luffy. Luffy was still staring at her. She opened her mouth. She had several options available to her in this moment, and she recognized all of them. She could say "I meant that platonically." She could say "That's not what I just meant." She could turn around and walk back to the helm, which was the most defensible position in terms of deniability. She didn't do any of those things. She stood in the rain, soaking wet, heart still hammering, and held his gaze. Luffy's expression did something she couldn't fully read. Not confusion, she'd learned to recognize real confusion on his face, and this wasn't it. Something more like the look he got when he was encountering a fact that he was turning over slowly, examining it from every angle before he responded, because he wanted to respond to the real thing rather than a quick surface reading of it. He opened his mouth. "Nami," Sanji said from the hatch, in a very controlled tone. "I think I need to go back to the kitchen." "Then go," Zoro said flatly, not looking at him. Sanji went. The rain fell. Luffy said, "I know. Not I love you too." "Not what?" "Not I don't understand." 2 words, quiet and certain and carrying more weight than their size should have been able to hold, because what Luffy meant by "I know" was something larger than simple awareness. It was the same thing he meant when he said something was okay or something was fine, a fundamental accounting of reality that he had done in his own way on his own timeline and filed somewhere very still and very deep. Nami stared at him. The wave that hit the Sunny then wasn't the biggest of the night, but it was the one that moved, and she grabbed the rail without looking and found her footing and looked back, and Luffy was still looking at her, and neither of them said anything else, because there wasn't anything else that needed to be said right then. And also because the storm had a second opinion about the pace of things and expressed it in the form of a wall of wind that hit the deck like a living thing and demanded every available hand. She walked back to the helm. She took the wheel off the brace. She found her heading. Behind her, she heard Luffy get up and shake the water off himself the way he always did, head first, then arms, like a dog, completely unconcerned with how it looked, and then his bare feet on the deck, moving toward the hatch. "Luffy!" Zoro's voice low. "Hmm?" A pause that was long enough to contain an entire conversation between them in the way that Zoro and Luffy sometimes communicated, which was mostly in pauses. Then Luffy's feet on the hatch steps, going below. Zoro appeared at Nami's left, took up position at the secondary sail control without saying anything, and for the next 2 hours they worked the storm together in near silence, the way the best sailing crews worked, moving not through communication but through a shared reading of the same water, the same wind, the same ship under their hands. The storm passed at 3 in the morning. It didn't so much end as step aside, the way the Grand Line's weather sometimes did, suddenly, definitively, as though it had accomplished whatever it came to do. The clouds broke in a line and through the gap came moonlight so direct and clean it looked like something poured from a container, spilling across the water in a wide silver path that led, coincidentally or not, in the exact direction of their heading. Nami looked at it for a long moment. She checked her log pose. She checked her charts. She marked the time and their position in her logbook with neat, careful handwriting, the pencil making a soft noise against the paper that she found grounding. She wrote the time, 3:04 a.m. She wrote their coordinates. She wrote, storm passed ahead of projection. Riding favorable current. ETA Murugain, 31 hours. She looked at the words for a moment, then turned the page and began a fresh weather notation, because that was what you did after a storm. You documented it, you learned from it, you moved forward with better information than you had before. The deck dripped quietly. The sunny sails breathed in and out in the clean aftermath breeze. Zoro was sitting with his back against the mast, not quite asleep, she could tell by the angle of his head. She walked past him toward the galley hatch, wanting something hot, and his voice stopped her at the hatch. "Nami!" She turned. He hadn't moved, still sitting with his arms crossed and his eyes mostly closed. In the moonlight his white shirt was dried stiff with salt. "What? You already knew he knew," Zoro said. "That's why it scared you. Not because you didn't think he cared. Because you knew he did." She looked at him for a long moment. "Good night, Zoro," she said. He said, which was almost exactly what Luffy had said in the water, and she filed that observation away somewhere uncomfortable, and went below. The galley was quiet and warm and smelled of the dinner they'd had and the tea that Sanji had apparently made and forgotten on the stove at some point, still gently simmering. She poured herself a cup and sat at the table and looked at the grain of the wood and was very deliberately not thinking about anything. She was thinking about everything. The thing was, and this was the thing she had maintained for a long time, the thing she had defended with the same rigor she applied to her charts and her weather readings and her navigational calculations, the thing was that feelings like this were not useful. She was the navigator. She was the person who saw where they were going while everyone else focused on the getting there. She was practical, and she was precise, and she was, if she was honest with herself, deeply afraid of wanting things that could be taken away. She'd grown up watching Arlong take things. She'd spent years learning that the safest position was to hold nothing too close, to maintain the professional distance that let you function when everything went sideways. She was good at that. She had built a life around being good at that. And then somewhere in the middle of the Grand Line, somewhere between a sky island and a sea of clouds and a desert country and a shipwright city built on water, she had gone and done the most tactically unsound things she was capable of, and she had done it in stages, so gradually she hadn't noticed until it was already completely done. And now she was sitting in the galley at 3 in the morning with a cup of terrible forgotten tea and the absolute certainty that she had said what she'd said and it had been heard and it was real and it was out there in the world now, permanent and unretractable. "I love you, you absolute idiot." She pressed the warm cup between both hands and made herself breathe slowly. "I know," he'd said. She had known, on some level, and Zoro was right about this, which annoyed her, because Zoro was right about exactly the kinds of things you most didn't want him to be right about. She had known that Luffy knew. She had known it the way you know something you haven't looked at directly for a long time. He'd known, and he had said nothing and pushed nothing and waited with the particular patience that he showed only for things he cared about most deeply, which was itself a kind of answer, and the reason she'd kept the confession contained was not because she feared rejection but because acknowledgement would make it real in a way she'd have to live with fully. She finished the tea. It was not good tea. She got up, washed the cup, and was turning toward the bunk corridor when the galley door opened. Luffy stood there in dry clothes. He'd changed, apparently, at some point, with his hair still slightly wild from the water and his eyes carrying the particular lucid quality they had at night when he wasn't performing anything for anyone. His straw hat was hanging from his arm. They looked at each other. "You should sleep," Nami said. "So should you," he said. "I'm going to." "Me too." Neither of them moved. The Sunny swayed gently in the post-storm current, a slow rocking that was almost comfortable. "Luffy," she said, and she heard her own voice using the tone she almost never used. "Not Navigator Nami, not Money Nami, not Crew Management Nami, just Nami, stripped of the professional overlay, slightly tired, slightly raw. We don't have to. I'm not asking you to, I'm not avoiding it," he said. Simply. Like it was important for her to know that specifically. She closed her mouth. "I'm just thinking," he said. And then, because he was Luffy and Luffy processed things in his own time and his own way and had never once in his life apologized for that, "I'll figure out what I want to say. Then I'll say it." "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. He turned and went back down the corridor. She stood in the galley for another moment, listening to the sound of his footsteps go quiet, and then she pressed her lips together and something in her chest, the tight, braced thing that had been there since she'd gone into the water, eased, fractionally, like a knot given exactly half a turn of slack. Not resolved. Not done. But breathing. She went to bed. The Sunny sailed southeast under the broken clouds, the moonlight lying across the deck in its wide silver path, the log pose pointing steady and sure at the island the sea didn't love, carrying 8 people and all their various complicated unfinished business through the dark water. Ahead of them, 31 hours of sailing away, the island of Murugain waited in the dark without making a sound. In the deep current below the Sunny's keel, something else was also waiting. But that was tomorrow's problem. Chapter 2: What the Navigator Carries. Morning on the Thousand Sunny had a specific texture that Nami had memorized without meaning to. It started with the smell, Sanji's coffee hitting the air sometime around 6, strong enough to travel through 2 decks of wood and steel and find you wherever you were sleeping. Then the sound of Frankie doing his morning exercises on the rear deck, which involved a great deal of metal-on-metal clanging and occasional self-affirmation delivered at full volume. Then Brooks' violin, which he played every morning without fail, something different each time, chosen apparently at random, though Nami had started to suspect after 2 years that Brooks' musical choices were not random at all and that he was in fact providing a daily emotional weather forecast that nobody else had figured out how to read. This morning he was playing something slow and searching. Something that kept circling back to the same phrase without quite resolving it. Nami lay in her bunk and listened to it, and stared at the ceiling. She had slept 4 hours, which was 2 less than she needed and 3 more than she'd expected. The ceiling of her cabin had a small water stain in the upper left corner from a storm 3 months ago that Frankie kept forgetting to seal, and she had spent a significant portion of those 4 hours thinking not about Luffy but about that water stain, which was the navigational equivalent of fixing your eyes on a specific point on the horizon when the sea was rough. You looked at the thing that wasn't moving. You used it to steady yourself. It hadn't especially worked, but the effort was something. She got up, washed her face, changed into fresh clothes, choosing them with perhaps slightly more attention than usual, which she acknowledged internally and was irritated by, and went to check her instruments before breakfast. The barometer had stabilized overnight. Good. The log pose was steady and pointing southeast with the particular quality it had when the island it was locked onto had a strong magnetic signature, a slight vibration in the needle, as though it was eager, which was a feature of log poses that Nami had never fully trusted. Enthusiasm in navigational equipment was rarely a good sign. She checked the wind. Southeasterly, light, good sailing conditions. She checked their speed by the old method, knotted rope over the side counting, and marked it in her log. She checked the current against her charts. They were making excellent time, better than her post-storm estimate. The storm had, as she'd predicted, pushed them forward. They would reach Muiragain in roughly 27 hours rather than 31. She made the notation, closed the log, and looked at the sea. It was a very blue morning. The Grand Line did that sometimes, alternated its impossible strangeness with stretches of water so classically, simply beautiful that it almost felt like an apology. The surface was barely ruffled, catching the early light in small bright pieces, the horizon clean and curved and distant in the way that horizons only looked from the deck of a ship. Nami had been on enough islands to know that there was a specific quality to the world from sea level that you couldn't replicate anywhere on land, the sense of being at the center of a circle, equally distant from every edge, the world arranged around you with perfect geometric patience. She breathed. Salt and clean air and something faintly green carry from somewhere ahead, though there was no island visible. "The coffee's ready," Sanji said from the galley hatch. His voice was normal. Professionally, carefully normal. She turned to look at him. He was leaning in the hatch with a cup already poured, holding it out to her with an expression that she recognized as the face Sanji wore when he was performing being fine because the alternative, actually discussing something emotional, was more than his particular emotional architecture could support at 7 in the morning. She walked over and took the cup. Their eyes met for a moment, and several things moved through the air between them that neither of them articulated. "Sanji," she said. "The eggs will be ready in 10 minutes, he said. She considered pushing on it. She looked at his face, the set of his jaw, the way he was not looking at anything specific, the slight tension in the hand that wasn't holding the tray, and she decided that 10 minutes of eggs was more useful to both of them right now than the conversation they weren't having. "Thank you," she said, and took her coffee back toward the helm. The crew arrived at breakfast in stages, which was normal. What was not normal was the quality of the silences. Usopp came in first, sat down, and looked at Nami with an expression that told her he knew. Of course he knew. Usopp's bunk was on the same deck as the galley and his hearing was, famously and annoyingly, exceptionally good. He had the grace to look at his food instead of at her, which she appreciated. Chopper arrived and immediately looked between Nami and the door and back to Nami with the transparent emotional visibility of someone who felt every feeling he had directly on the surface of his face. His ears were angled in a configuration she recognized as concern but trying to hide it, which on a reindeer was not especially subtle. "Good morning," he said, with approximately 40% more brightness than the situation called for. "Morning," Nami said. Robin arrived, sat across from Nami, opened her book before the food was even on the table, and said nothing at all, which was its own form of communication. Frankie crashed in from below wearing sunglasses despite being indoors and launched immediately into a description of a modification he wanted to make to the Sunny's forward ballast system that he was convinced would improve their stability in exactly the kind of lateral wave conditions they'd dealt with last night. And his enthusiasm was so genuine, and so total, and so blissfully removed from any awareness of interpersonal atmosphere that Nami felt something in her shoulders drop. "Sounds expensive," she said. "Super expensive," Frankie confirmed happily. "But super worth it. We'll discuss it." "That's Navigator for yes," Usopp told Chopper in a stage whisper. "That is absolutely not Navigator for yes," Nami said. Zoro arrived, sat, ate, and said nothing. He hadn't said anything to anyone about last night. She was fairly certain he wouldn't. Zoro filed information and deployed it when it was useful and otherwise kept it somewhere quiet. It was one of his least annoying qualities. Brook arrived, stopped playing his violin long enough to bow to Nami with the particular courtliness he reserved for moments when he sensed emotional complexity in the room, said, "Nami-san, you appear to have survived the storm with remarkable grace, if I may say so, though perhaps the storm was not entirely the seas, yo-ho-ho," and then sat down before she could respond. She stared at him. Brooke, she said. Yes? Never mind. Yo-ho-ho. Luffy arrived last. He came through the galley hatch with the same energy he brought to every morning, not exactly cheerful, not exactly awake, just present in the way that Luffy was present, taking up exactly the amount of space his body occupied without any effort at contraction or expansion. He sat down, pulled a plate toward him, looked at the food, and then looked at Nami the way he always looked at Nami in the mornings, which was directly and without a great deal of interpretive ambiguity. Morning, he said. Morning, she said. She watched, couldn't help watching, the rest of the crew in her peripheral vision. Usopp was studying the ceiling with sudden intense interest. Chopper's ears had moved about 15 degrees. Frankie was mid-sentence about ballast and soldiered through it, which she respected. Robin turned a page. Zoro ate. Sanji emerged from the kitchen portion of the galley, set a plate in front of Luffy, looked at Luffy for approximately half a second with an expression that had shed all its professional composure and was briefly just a person in pain, and then set the next plate down in front of Nami with absolute gentle care before retreating back to the stove. Nobody said anything. Luffy was eating. The silence stretched about 4 seconds past comfortable, and then Usopp, bless him, said, "So I was thinking about what Robin said last night, about Murugane's reputation. What kind of reputation are we talking exactly? Because there's mysterious reputation and then there are sea monsters in the harbor reputation, and I have historically had very different survival rates in those two categories." Very different. Chopper agreed eagerly, leaning forward. The historical texts are not specific, Robin said, not looking up from her book. They describe it as an island of concluded things. Which is evocative but not especially tactical. Concluded things? Usopp repeated. What does that mean? It means, Robin said, turning another page, that several accounts mention arriving at Murugane and feeling strongly that certain matters, personal, professional, emotional, had reached their end point. She paused. 2 of the 3 captains who documented visits there turned their ships around before landing. The 3rd landed and wrote that the island had a way of making unfinished things feel very urgent. The table was quiet for a moment. Great, Usopp said. That's great. That's exactly the information I wanted to have on this beautiful morning. I think it sounds interesting, Luffy said. Of course you do, Usopp said. What sank the other ships? Zoro said. Not alarmed, it wasn't a question born from fear but from the same professional interest he brought to any intelligence about a new battlefield. Nothing sank them, Robin said. They all came back. They just came back, changed. The accounts used that word specifically. The sailors were changed. Changed how? Chopper asked. Robin smiled. The accounts don't specify. I hate this island already, Usopp announced. You haven't seen it yet, Frankie pointed out. I hate it already, Frankie, that's the whole point. The conversation became general after that, the way conversations on the Sunny always eventually did, growing larger and louder and less focused, pulled in multiple directions by multiple personalities, and Nami let it wash over her while she ate and watched the table and did the thing she was always doing, which was running the calculations, tracking the variables, reading the room the way she read the water. Luffy was eating. He looked, to most observers, exactly the same as always. But she had spent enough years at this table watching him to know that exactly the same as always was itself information, because Luffy didn't perform normality. He either was normal, or he wasn't, and when he was performing normal it had a specific quality, a very slight deliberateness in his movements that wasn't usually there. Like he was being careful. Not upset. Not distant. Just careful. She looked down at her food. I'll figure out what I want to say, he told her. Then I'll say it. She believed him completely. That was the thing about Luffy, you always believed him completely, not because he was always right about everything but because he never said things he didn't mean. He had no capacity for social lying, none of the reflexive reassurances that most people deployed to manage situations. When he said he'd figure it out and say it, he would figure it out and say it, at the exact moment he was ready and not a second before. The waiting was going to be interesting. She spent the morning on deck running her standard mid-journey checks, current variations, wind shift patterns, barometric pressure readings every 2 hours, a full recalibration of the log pose against her backup compass, and a careful study of the watercolor ahead, which had taken on a faint greenish tint in the last hour that she wanted to track. Around 10 o'clock, Frankie brought her a tool she hadn't asked for and wouldn't have needed and was clearly an excuse. "So," Frankie said. "No," Nami said. "I wasn't going to, you were," she said. "And the answer is no, we're not discussing it." Frankie held the tool for a moment. He was a man made largely of metal and cola and enthusiasm, with emotional range that he deployed loudly and without shame, which Nami had initially found overwhelming and had gradually come to appreciate. He looked at her now with an expression of genuine warmth that had nothing performative in it. "For what it's worth," he said. "Frankie. He's not like other people, is all I'm saying. I know he's not like other people. I mean, like the way he is about the crew. About you specifically." Frankie shrugged his enormous shoulders, the metal components of them catching the light. "I've built a lot of things. Ships, mostly. You learn to recognize when something is load-bearing. You know what I mean?" She looked at him. "I'm going below," Frankie said cheerfully. "Super productive morning." He left. Nami looked back at the water. The greenish tint was spreading. She made a note. Usopp found her at noon, which she'd half expected because Usopp was constitutionally incapable of maintaining silence about anything emotionally significant for more than 6 hours, and it had now been 8, which meant he'd been exercising extraordinary self-control. He didn't approach with an excuse, to his credit. He just walked up and leaned on the railing beside her and looked at the water. "I wasn't eavesdropping," he said. "I know." The hatch was open. "I know, Usopp. And the wind was going in a direction that kind of, I know," she said. "It's fine." He looked at her sideways. His nose, and she had always felt that Usopp's nose was one of the most emotionally expressive noses she had ever encountered, was doing something complicated. "Are you though?" he said. "Fine." She considered lying. She was quite good at lying. She'd spent years doing it professionally, at a standard that would have impressed most career criminals. She could produce a convincing fine that would shut the conversation down and get Usopp nodding and backing away within about 30 seconds. "I said it because he almost drowned," she said instead, which wasn't a lie but wasn't the whole truth either. "I mean," Usopp said carefully. "Yeah. But also it's been true for a while and I've been keeping it in a very organized drawer in my mind, and last night the drawer fell off the wall," she said, briskly, like it was a navigational problem she was diagnosing. Usopp was quiet for a moment. "How long is a while?" "Long enough that I should have done the math earlier and been better prepared." "That's a very Nami way to describe having feelings." "Yes," she agreed. He was quiet again. The water moved beneath them, the greenish tint more pronounced now. She'd identified it about an hour ago as trace phosphorescence from deep water vegetation, which meant they were passing over a significant undersea plateau. She'd marked it. "He sat on the figurehead for 2 hours this morning," Usopp said. She looked at him. "Luffy?" "Just sitting there. Not doing anything. Looking at the water." Usopp scratched the back of his neck. "I only know because I was trying to get to the storage locker and I looked up and he was just there. He didn't ask for food or anything. Just Saturday." Nami looked forward toward the Sunny's lion-headed bow, though it was around the curve of the ship from where she stood. "For 2 hours. Approximately. I wasn't counting." She turned back to the water. The phosphorescent green deepened for a moment, and then faded as they passed beyond the plateau's edge, and the sea went back to its regular blue, and she tracked the transition in her log without looking down from the horizon. "He'll figure it out," she said. "Not to Usopp. Or not only to Usopp." "Yeah," Usopp said. "He always does." The afternoon brought wind. Not storm wind, nothing threatening, just a strong steady southeasterly that came up around 2 o'clock and pushed the Sunny with a kind of cheerful enthusiasm, the sails going full and tight, the ship leaning into it with her hull doing its efficient work. It was good sailing. The kind of sailing that reminded you why people chose the sea in the first place. The combination of speed and silence, the deck vibrating faintly with the energy of movement, the bows sending small celebrations of spray into the air. Nami let herself enjoy it. She was good at sailing. She was, without false modesty, exceptional at it. And the thing about being exceptional at something was that the doing of it occupied a specific part of your brain that crowded out other occupants. When she was working, really working, fully engaged with current and wind and heading, there wasn't room for much else, and she valued that about navigation beyond its practical function. Zoro came to stand near the helm at some point in the mid-afternoon. Not at the helm, near it. He brought his swords, which he sometimes did when the weather was good, sitting cross-legged on the deck and running whetstone along the blades with long, patient strokes that had their own rhythm. They existed in companionable silence for a while. "You're not going to say anything, are you?" Nami said. "Not a question." "I said what I had to say last night," Zoro said. "That I knew he already knew." She adjusted the heading 2 degrees. The sail snapped and settled. "What would you have done?" she said, and then stopped, because she hadn't meant to ask that and wasn't sure she wanted the answer. Zoro didn't answer immediately. He turned the blade, examined the edge, made another careful stroke. The stone made a soft, persistent sound. "The same thing," he said finally. "Eventually." She looked down at him. He was looking at the sword, not at her, but there was something in the set of his jaw that was not quite its usual impassivity. "You've got good timing, at least," he said. "Sanji's been weird since this morning, which will keep him distracted and mean he makes better food. Stress improves his cooking by about 15%. Nami stared at him. "That's genuinely the most useful perspective anyone has offered me today," she said. "I know," Zoro said, and went back to the whetstone. Robin found her at the chart table in the late afternoon, when the light had gone gold and long and the temperature had dropped 2 degrees. Nami had noted it, as she noted all temperature variations, because in the Grand Line temperature drops ahead of islands often preceded significant weather or navigational features. Robin pulled a chair to the opposite side of the chart table without asking, which she never did, and spread a book open in front of her that was clearly not the main object of her attention. Nami looked up. "If you're going to offer wisdom, I wasn't going to offer wisdom," Robin said. "I was going to read." Then read. Robin read. Or appeared to read. Her eyes moved across the page with their usual deliberateness. After perhaps 5 minutes she said, without looking up, "There's a difference between keeping something safe and keeping it contained." Nami was marking a current on her chart. Her pencil stopped. "Keeping something safe means protecting it," Robin continued. "Keeping it contained means you don't trust yourself to hold it and let it still be held. Those are different fears." Nami looked at her. Robin turned a page. "I spent 30 years containing things," she said, in the same conversational tone she might use to remark on weather. "I'm not suggesting one approach over the other. I'm just noting the distinction. Since you seem like someone who prefers accurate definitions." Nami looked back at her chart. "You've been talking to Zoro," Nami said. "No," Robin said. "Zoro and I arrived at similar observations independently, which probably means something. It means you're both observant in deeply inconvenient ways." "Yes," Robin agreed pleasantly. Nami made the notation on her chart. The current was running stronger than her reference chart suggested, which was worth monitoring. She drew the line carefully, labeled it, and cross-referenced it against her barometric data. "Robin," she said. Does it get easier? Letting something out of the container?" Robin was quiet for a moment. Outside, the wind worked its way around the hull with a sound like breath. "The container becomes unnecessary," Robin said. "That's different from easier." You stop needing it because you stop being afraid of the thing you were protecting against. But that takes time. She paused. And usually something that forces the issue. Like a storm, Nami said. Like a storm, Robin agreed. She closed her book, stood, smoothed her coat, and walked toward the galley hatch. At the hatch she stopped. The island ahead, she said. Murugain. The text I was reading this morning described it as the place where pending things are resolved. Not concluded. I may have mistranslated the original last night. Resolved. There's a difference. Yes, Nami said. I thought that was relevant, Robin said, and went below. Nami was still at the chart table 2 hours later when she heard the log pose. Not heard, felt. The log pose didn't make sound, but it had a vibration at the extreme limit of perception when the island it was locked onto came within a certain range, a specific distance that varied by island size and magnetic density. She'd discovered this about 3 months into the Grand Line and had never met another navigator who noticed it. She put 2 fingers lightly against the compass housing and confirmed it. 22 hours out, give or take. They'd made up more time than she'd calculated. She looked at the heading and then looked at the horizon, which was empty and blue and entirely unhelpful. Murugain was still well below the sight line, but something, and she was a rigorous enough thinker to be irritated by her own imprecision here, something about the air ahead had changed. A quality she couldn't chart. A weight. She was still sitting with this when the galley hatch opened and Luffy came out. He had his straw hat on. He almost always had his straw hat on, but there was a specific way he wore it when he was thinking about something, slightly forward, chin down, the brim cutting a shadow across his eyes, versus the way he wore it when he was just wearing it, which was back and easy. Right now it was forward. He walked across the deck and sat on the railing 6 feet from the chart table, one leg over the edge, one on the deck, with the casual disregard for falling that was one of his more irritating physical habits. He didn't say anything immediately. Looked at the water. Nami kept her eyes on her chart. I've been thinking, he said. I know, she said. About what you said. She set her pencil down. Luffy, I'm not finished yet, he said. Not unkindly. Just with the particular directness he brought to things he'd decided were important. She closed her mouth. He was quiet for a moment. The water moved beneath them. The sunny creaked her familiar evening sounds. Somewhere behind them, Brook had started playing again, different from this morning, something warmer, more resolved. I don't think about things the way other people do, Luffy said. I know that. I never thought about whether I like someone in the way that. I didn't care about that. Romance and all that. He made a vague gesture that might have indicated romance, or the Grand Line, or all of existence. With Luffy it was sometimes hard to narrow down. But the way I care about the people in this crew. He stopped. Tried a different approach. You know how you can tell the difference between what's yours and what isn't. What do you mean? Like. He paused, and she could see him working through it, choosing words with more deliberateness than he usually bothered with. My hat is mine. Not because I own it. Because of what it means. Ace's Viva card was mine. Not because he gave it to me, but because of what it meant to carry it. He looked at her then, direct and uncomplicated. The way I think about you isn't the same as the way I think about everyone else. It hasn't been for a long time. I don't know what all the right words are for that. But I know it's mine. And I know you're not just my navigator. The evening air moved between them. Nami looked at him. The dying light was doing something to the water behind him, turning it copper and gold, and he was sitting with his leg over the rail like he always sat and his hat slightly forward and his face carrying that expression she couldn't categorize, the careful, certain one, the one that was doing math. You sat on the figurehead for 2 hours this morning, she said. Usopp told you. Usopp tells me everything. Luffy's mouth pulled into something that was almost a smile. I was trying to figure out how to say it without it sounding wrong. Did you figure it out? Mostly, he said. The rest I'll work out as I go. That's how you approach everything. she pointed out. It works pretty well, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked her pencil back up and went back to her chart. Not because she was dismissing him, she could feel that he understood she wasn't dismissing him, but because this was what she did, and he knew what she did, and the chart needed marking, and being known enough that you didn't have to perform anything was itself a kind of answer to the question she hadn't asked yet. 22 hours to Muragain, she said. Will it be trouble? He asked. Not anxious about it. Just checking the horizon, the way he did. Probably, she said. Good, he said, and he sounded exactly like himself, and she felt something settle fully into place in her chest that she didn't have a word for, and wasn't sure she needed one. The trouble with Muragain announced itself at sunset. Not in the way trouble usually announced itself on the Grand Line, which was generally through dramatic weather phenomena, visible enemy ships, or Luffy somehow making direct eye contact with a person who would become their problem for the next 3 weeks. This was quieter. The Den Mushi in the navigation room made 3 short pulses. Not a call, a signal. A specifically formatted signal on a channel that shouldn't have been carrying traffic, since it was a marine emergency frequency that the crew of a pirate ship had no business receiving and certainly no business being targeted by. Nami stared at the Den Mushi. It pulsed again. 3 short, too long. 3 short, too long. She picked up the receiver. Static. Then, through it, a voice. Clear and unhurried, in the way that voices were clear and unhurried when the person speaking had arranged things to their complete satisfaction before speaking. Straw Hat Luffy, the voice said. I have been waiting for you to come within range. I want to be courteous, you deserve at least that. My name is Verith. I was an admiral, before I resigned. I imagine you'll want to know why I'm contacting you. Nami didn't move. I'm on Muragain, the voice continued. I've been here for some time, actually. I knew the currents would bring you. The Grand Line is very predictable, if you're patient enough, and I have always been a patient man. A pause. The static breathed. I have no interest in capturing you. I have no interest in your bounty. What I want is considerably more significant than that. I want to demonstrate something, to the world, through you, as its most visible symbol of the wrong kind of hope. Another pause. I'm going to dismantle you. Carefully. Thoughtfully. The way you dismantle anything that matters, not with force but with proof. The signal ended. 3 short, too long, and then silence. Nami set the receiver down. She looked at her chart. She looked at the log pose. She looked at the heading she'd been maintaining for the past 22 hours, carrying them steadily, efficiently, directly toward an island where someone had been sitting in careful patience specifically waiting for them to arrive. She picked up the receiver and said, quietly but with absolute clarity, Luffy. He was in the navigation room in 45 seconds, because 45 seconds was how long it took him to stop doing whatever he was doing anywhere on the ship and appear when she used that specific tone. He read the situation on her face before she said a word. Tell me, he said. She played him the message. He listened with the particular stillness he brought to serious things, the hat back now, the grin gone, his eyes carrying the other quality they had, the one that was not rubber or comedy or the chaotic joy he operated on most of the time, but something older and far more considered. When it finished, he was quiet for a moment. He's been waiting, Luffy said. Planned it, she said. The currents, the timing. He knew we were coming. Good, Luffy said. She stared at him. If he planned this much, Luffy said, then he's going to be interesting. He looked at her. You're not changing the heading. No, she said. Because she wasn't. Because the island was ahead and the log pose was locked and their course was their course, and someone sitting on a rock waiting for them with a carefully prepared speech was not, in the grand accounting of threats they had navigated together, the thing that changed their heading. Luffy nodded. Looked at the Den Mushi. Then at her. Nami, he said. We'll be okay, he said. and then, in the specific private register of someone saying the second thing behind the first thing. Both of those things are true at the same time. She understood him completely. She nodded once. Wake the crew, she said. Tell them what I just told you. And Luffy. He was already at the door. He looked back. Tell Zoro to sleep. He'll need it tomorrow and he'll stay up all night if someone doesn't tell him explicitly. Luffy grinned, the real one, full and easy, and went. Nami turned back to her charts and picked up her pencil and began preparing the approach to Murugain with every instrument and calculation available to her. Because when you were sailing towards something that was waiting for you, the best weapon you brought was knowing the water better than it expected you to. Around her the Sunny moved through the darkening sea, and the log poles vibrated against her fingers, and somewhere ahead an island held its breath. Chapter 3, Murugain's welcome. The island appeared at dawn. Not gradually, not the slow emergence from fog or the creeping suggestion of land above the horizon that most islands offered. Murugain simply was there when the light came up, as though it had been standing in the dark the whole night waiting for visibility to confirm what it already knew. It sat in the water with the particular solidity of very old things, a dark mass of cliffs and dense treeline rising sharply from a coastline that offered almost no beach, just rock meeting water in a hard, definitive line, as though the island had decided long ago that it wasn't interested in gradual transitions. Nami stood at the helm and looked at it, and felt the log pose go still. Not vibrating anymore. Settled. Pointed directly at the island's center with a fixed certainty that was the log pose's way of saying we're here, which was fine, that was what she wanted, but there was something in the completeness of the stillness that made her want to tap the housing and confirm it was working correctly. She tapped it anyway. Still pointed. Completely, absolutely still. Huh, she said quietly. That bad? Zoro said from behind her. He was already armed, all 3 swords, which she told him to do in the pre-dawn briefing she'd run for the crew 2 hours ago. He'd arrived at that briefing already armed, which told her he'd been awake before she called it, which meant he hadn't slept when she told him to sleep, which was exactly what she'd expected and why she told Luffy to tell him specifically and not merely assumed the message would work. Not bad, she said. Just certain. Is that different? On the Grand Line? Yes. She looked at the treeline through her scope. Dense. Old growth, she guessed. The trees had a particular vertical weight, the kind that came from centuries of growing without competition. The cliffs below them were dark stone, almost black in the morning light, with a single gap that looked like it might have been a harbor once, long ago, the stone on either side too regular to be natural erosion. Someone had cut it. Someone who knew about ships. Robin was right about old, Nami said. Behind her the crew was assembling with varying degrees of readiness. Luffy was at the bow, looking at the island with his arms over the rail and his hat pushed back, and she could see from here the set of his shoulders, not tense, but attentive, which was Luffy's version of preparation. Frankie had his arsenal out, his cyborg systems running through their pre-deployment checks with a series of soft mechanical sounds. Usopp had his bag open and was going through it with the systematic efficiency he only showed before things he was actually frightened of, which was a reliable indicator of his genuine threat assessment because Usopp's bravado was inversely proportional to real danger. When he was bragging loudly, he wasn't scared. When he was quietly and methodically checking his ammunition, he was. Is everyone armed? Nami called, not taking her eyes off the island. Yes, multiple voices said. Chopper, she said. I have my rumble balls, Chopper said. All 3. Robin. Ready, Robin said. Sanji. Obviously, Sanji said in the clipped tone he used when he'd already resolved himself to violence. Brook. Yo-ho-ho-ho, I have been dead before, Nami-san, and found it only mildly inconvenient. That's a yes, Nami said. She brought the Sunny into the harbor gap at quarter speed, reading the depth by eye and by feel. The water here was dark and clear, dropping quickly, which meant the harbor was deep enough for the Sunny's keel with room to spare. Someone had built this for large ships. The stone on either side of the gap was carved with markings she didn't recognize, whether to near illegibility but clearly intentional, regular, geometric, not decorative. Functional. Navigational, possibly. She filed them for later. The harbor opened beyond the gap into a small natural basin, protected on 3 sides by cliff face and on the 4th by the sea. The basin's inner edge had what remained of a dock, stone, mostly intact, with iron rings still set into it at intervals that matched the Sunny's deck cleats with an uncanny accuracy that made the back of her neck prickle. "Someone measured," Frankie said, standing at the rail and looking at the rings. "Someone measured a long time ago," Robin said. "Are those our size?" Luffy asked. "Almost exactly," Nami said. Luffy considered this for approximately 1 second. "I like this island," he said. "You like everything," Usopp said. "That's not true," Luffy said. "I don't like waiting." "Then it's good we're here," Zoro said. Nami brought the Sunny in and Frankie through the lines and they hit the iron rings clean, which was either good seamanship or the island meeting them halfway, and she couldn't fully determine which. The island smelled of stone and old wood and something green and faintly electrical, like the air before lightning, which shouldn't have been present in calm morning weather, and which she noted and didn't like. They went ashore. The dock connected to a path that connected to what had once been a town. You could see it was a town from the structure, the regularity of the ruins, the way the remaining walls stood in rows that suggested streets, the cleared central space that could only have been a square. But it was old enough that town was almost too recent a word for it. The stone had been colonized by decades of moss and root, the walls half dissolved back into the landscape, the streets grown over with the particular dense ground cover that appeared in places where nothing had walked for a long time. The trees pressed close on all sides, not threatening exactly, just indifferent. The trees had been growing before whatever had happened here and were continuing to grow after, and had no particular opinion about the humans currently examining their territory. "This was substantial," Robin said. She was moving slowly through the ruins, touching the walls with her fingertips, reading the stonework the way Nami read current patterns, looking for information in texture and structure. "A city, really. Population of several thousand at least. What happened to them?" Chopper asked. He was staying close to Usopp, which was their default configuration in unfamiliar environments. "That," Robin said, "is the interesting question." The ruins showed no damage. No fire, no collapse from violence. The structures had simply been vacated and then slowly returned to by the landscape. Everything was in place except the people. Tables in what had been a building near the dock, overturned but intact. A carved stone calendar on the central square's main wall, its markings still legible, stopped at a date none of them could translate. Personal effects in the ruins of what looked like homes, tools, ceramic pieces, the corroded remnants of metal objects, all left, all abandoned with the abruptness of a decision made quickly. "They left in a hurry," Usopp said. "Or all at once," Robin said. "Is there a difference?" Chopper asked. "Both, perhaps," Robin said. Luffy had walked to the center of the square and was standing there looking at the calendar on the wall with his arms crossed, which was not a posture he used often. Nami came to stand beside him. The calendar was dense with markings, a sophisticated system, she could see that much, laid out in concentric rings that she suspected tracked multiple overlapping cycles. "What do you see?" she asked him. "It stopped mid-cycle," he said. "Not at the end of anything. Middle of something." He touched one of the inner rings. "Like someone was in the middle of counting and just stopped." She looked at him. "How can you tell it's mid-cycle?" "The patterns," he said. "The outer ring goes all the way around. The inner ones don't." He looked at her. "You see it too?" She did. She'd seen it. She hadn't expected him to. "You're better at reading patterns than you let on." "I don't let on anything," he said. "I just don't explain the things that don't need explaining." She considered that for a moment. She thought about the chart she'd been keeping in her head, the one with him on it, running alongside all her other calculations, always present, always updated without announcement. I just don't explain the things that don't need explaining. Something landed quietly in her chest. Okay, she said. Teams. She'd planned the teams before they docked, running the combinations in her head the way she ran navigational calculations, accounting for variables, pairing strengths that complemented, distributing the crew's capabilities to cover the island's size and the threat she'd assessed from the message last night. Zoro, Robin, and Frankie, the northern part of the island, which her scope had shown was the highest point, a raised plateau where any defensive installation would logically be built. The most dangerous ground. The three of them were, in their respective ways, the most capable of handling whatever was up there. Sanji, Chopper, and Usopp, the eastern side, which had shown what looked like a second, smaller structure cluster through the scope, potentially a secondary installation or just the island's outer residential district. Sanji's speed and Chopper's medical capability balanced Usopp's range. Brook the Sunny. Nami had given him specific instructions, and he had received them with the grave seriousness she needed from him, which Brook was capable of when the moment required it. The Sunny needed someone aboard who could respond quickly if anything approached from the water. Which left Nami and Luffy for the central ruins and whatever lay at their heart. She had not arranged this accidentally. She had also not arranged it because of last night. She had arranged it because Luffy was the person she trusted most in a situation with unknown variables, because his ability to respond to anything was unmatched, and because if Vareth was in these ruins somewhere, the person who needed to be standing next to her was the one who wasn't afraid of anything they'd find. Those were the tactical reasons. The other reason she wasn't examining right now. Back here in 2 hours, she told everyone. Snail calls every 30 minutes on the secondary frequency. If you don't check in, we come looking. She looked at each team in turn. Don't touch anything you don't understand. Don't go underground alone. And if you hear anything that sounds like a voice that shouldn't be there how? Usopp asked. A voice you recognize that has no reason to be on this island. Robin said quietly, from slightly behind Nami. The way she said it, carefully, specifically, silenced the follow-up questions. They moved out. The central ruins went deeper than the outer district suggested. Not deeper underground, deeper inward, a series of concentric structures that grew older as you moved toward the center, the stonework shifting from the relatively recent ruins of the outer city to something considerably more ancient at the core. The moss here was different, denser, darker, with an almost architectural quality, as though it had been growing along the same lines as the stone beneath it for long enough that the distinction had become philosophical. Nami and Luffy moved through it in a silence that was not uncomfortable. She had her instruments out, barometer, compass, the small electromagnetic sensor Frankie had made for her after their experience with a magnetically anomalous island 2 months ago. All three were reading within normal range, which was itself slightly surprising given what she'd felt from the log pose this morning. Luffy walked with his hands in his pockets, which was his version of being at rest while still being completely ready. She'd learned to read the difference. This was not casual. This was the contained readiness of someone who had decided to trust the environment until the environment gave them a reason not to. He said he's on the island, Luffy said. Yes. He hasn't shown himself yet. Patience, she said. He told us that about himself. He's patient. He's letting us come to him. Or letting us look around first, Luffy said. So we understand the place before we talk. She glanced at him. That's a generous interpretation. No, he said. It's the most dangerous one. If he wants us to understand this place before we talk, it means he thinks this place will make his argument for him. She stopped walking. He stopped too and looked at her. That's, she said. That's exactly right. She looked at the ruins around them, the abandoned precision of them. The calendar stopped at its mid-cycle. The place where pending things are resolved. He wants us to feel the weight of what happened here before he explains what he's proposing to do to us. Context, Luffy said. Framing, she said. There's a difference. He considered it. What's the difference? Context helps you understand something. Framing manipulates you into a predetermined conclusion. Then we look at it ourselves first, he said, before he gets to tell us what to see. She looked at him for a moment. He was looking at the ruins with clear, unsentimental attention, the same attention he brought to opponents he was studying, not intimidated, not dismissive, just fully present and processing. Yes, she said. Exactly that. They went on. The center of the ruins was a structure that had clearly been the most important building in whatever this city had been. The architecture said so in the same way that certain buildings everywhere in the world announced their significance through size and centrality, and the amount of stone that had been invested in their permanence. It was circular. 2 stories of the outer walls remained intact, the roof long since gone, the interior now open to the sky in a way that gave it a quality somewhere between a building and a clearing. The floor was stone, mostly clear. The lack of vegetation inside the walls suggested the stone had properties that discouraged growth, or that it had been maintained more recently than the outer buildings. At the center of the floor was a table. Not ancient. Not carved stone. A table, wood relatively recent, with 2 chairs placed at it with geometric precision, facing each other across a short distance. On the table were 2 cups. Steam rising from both. Nami stopped at the entrance to the building and looked at the table and felt the particular quality of emotion that she associated with being outmaneuvered by someone who had spent significantly more time on a problem than she had. He knew we'd find this first, she said. Yeah, Luffy said. He made tea. Before we even came ashore. The harbor rings fit our ship, Luffy said. He measured. He's been ready for a while. He walked in, crossed the stone floor without hesitation, reached the table, picked up one of the cups, and examined it. Then he set it back down and looked up at her. It's good tea. I can smell it from here. How is that helpful? It tells us he has good taste, Luffy said. Which means he's probably not boring. He looked around the open-roofed structure without urgency. He's not here yet. He'll come when he's ready. She stepped inside and stood at the table, not sitting, looking at the second chair. He's staging this. He wants us seated, disarmed by the Nami, Luffy said. She looked at him. Sit down, he said. Not because he wants you to. Because your feet hurt. She looked down at her feet. She'd been on them since 4 a.m. She sat down. Luffy didn't sit. He leaned against the wall to her left, 1 foot against the stone, hands in pockets, watching the entrance to the building. His position meant that whoever came through the entrance would see him before they saw her, which she was fairly certain he'd calculated without appearing to calculate it. They waited. The island was very quiet. She had noticed this when they first docked. The quality of the silence here wasn't the silence of emptiness but the silence of density, as though the air was full of something that hadn't decided to express itself as sound yet. Like a room full of people holding their breath. The trees outside the open walls moved slightly in the wind. Can I ask you something? She said. When you said I know, she said. Last night in the rain. What did you know, exactly? I want to understand what you heard when I said it. He looked at her. The light inside the open-roofed structure was a specific morning quality, filtered, diffuse, bouncing off the pale stone walls to produce something that had no harsh shadows. She could see his face clearly, and she looked at it without performing anything, just looked. I heard that you'd been carrying it for a long time, he said. That it cost you something to say it. That you said it anyway because you were scared, and sometimes that's when the real things come out. He paused. And that you meant all of it. Not just that you felt something, but all of what the words meant. She looked at him. All of what they meant, she said carefully. The idiot part too, he said, and the corner of his mouth moved. She felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't fully known was clenched. I did mean that part. I know you did, he said. That's the part one trusts most. Vareth arrived 12 minutes later. He came from the north entrance, There were two, she noted them when they came in, and he moved through it with the particular quality of a person who had never once in their life needed to announce themselves because the room reorganized itself around their presence automatically. He was older than the voice on the Den Mushi had suggested, late 50s, she guessed, with the kind of frame that had once been physically extraordinary and had transitioned into something leaner and more deliberate without losing the underlying substance. His hair was white and cut short, and his clothes were civilian but expensive. He had no weapons visible, which was itself information. He looked at Luffy first. Then at Nami, still seated at his table. Something passed through his expression, not surprise, but the adjustment of someone recalculating a variable that had come in slightly different than projected. "You sat down," he said to her. "My feet hurt," she said. He considered this for a moment, and then, to her surprise and slight irritation, he smiled. It was a genuine smile, which she hadn't expected. It had no performance in it. "The navigator," he said. "Nami, I read your file." "I don't have a file," she said. "You have a very short marine file with almost nothing in it," he said, "which is itself remarkable given what I know you've done. You're good at not being documented." He moved to the table and stood at the chair opposite her, not sitting. He looked at Luffy against the wall. "And you? You're smaller in person." "People say that," Luffy said. "They do," Varys said. "And they're always wrong about what it means." He pulled the chair out and sat, unhurried, and folded his hands on the table. "I made tea. It's probably gotten cold." "It was good tea," Luffy said. "I could smell it." Varys looked at him for a moment. "Yes," he said. "It was." He looked back at Nami. "I'd like to explain myself, if you'll permit it." "You went to a lot of trouble," she said. "We'll hear the explanation." He nodded slowly. "The world government," he said, "is dying. I want to be clear that I don't mean this as a political opinion. I mean it as a structural assessment. It has too many weight-bearing elements that are rotten: the celestial dragons, the corruption in Marine Command, the warlord system, the way it has historically responded to anything it can't control by attempting to erase it." He paused. "I was admiral for 11 years. I saw all of it from the inside. I resigned 8 years ago because I calculated that staying would make me complicit in the collapse rather than instrumental in managing it." "Managing the collapse?" Nami said. "Yes," he said. "There is a version of the world governance end that produces something better. And a version that produces chaos severe enough that millions of people die in the power vacuum." He looked at her. "I have spent 8 years building toward the first version. And we're a problem for that," Luffy said. Varys looked at him. "You're a symbol," he said. "The Straw Hat Pirates represent a proof of concept that the world is not ready for. The idea that someone can simply refuse the system, refuse to be captured, refuse to be contained, refuse to become a warlord or a revolutionary or any other manageable category, and succeed." He leaned forward slightly. "The problem is not that this idea is wrong. The problem is that it's premature. If the Revolutionary Army uses you as their evidence that the old world is already defeated, they will accelerate their timeline. They will move before they're ready. And the collapse will be the bad kind. The ruins were very quiet around them." "So you want to dismantle us?" Nami said. "I want to demonstrate that you can be stopped," Varys said. "That the idea is not yet absolute. That the system, while broken, is not yet defeated." He spread his hands on the table, a gesture of something she might have called honesty if she trusted him more. "I have considerable resources. I have the equipment of a former admiral, which I did not surrender when I resigned. I have had 8 years of patience and preparation." He looked at Luffy. "And I have this island, which has properties I have spent 2 years learning to deploy." "The island does something," Luffy said. "The island has resonance chambers buried throughout its geology," Varys said. "Built by a civilization that used sound as their primary technology, they understood frequencies that modern science doesn't have language for yet. The chambers can be activated to produce specific effects in specific locations. He said this flatly, without drama. The worst kind of threat. I have spent 2 years mapping them and keying them to a system I control. Nami looked at him. She looked at the stone floor beneath her feet. The walls around her. We're inside a resonance chamber right now, she said. You've been inside one since you docked, he said. She looked at Luffy. Luffy was looking at Vareth with the expression he wore when he was deciding something. Not deciding whether to fight. That decision was always available to Luffy and never required deliberation. Deciding something more specific. She watched him arrive at it. You're not going to use it right now, Luffy said. Vareth raised an eyebrow. You made tea, Luffy said. You set up chairs. You waited for us to come through the island ourselves before you came in. He pushed off the wall and stood upright. You want to talk first. I want you to understand first, Vareth said. He looked at Luffy with the expression she'd seen a few times on people meeting Luffy up close for the first time. The adjustment, the recalibration, the addition of a variable that wasn't in any file or report. Yes. I want you to understand what I'm doing and why before I do it. Because doing it without your understanding would feel like waste. Respect, Nami said. Call it what you want, Vareth said. No, she said. I'm not calling it that. I'm identifying what it is because it matters tactically. She looked at him steadily. You respect us. Which means you're not certain. If you were certain this would work, you wouldn't need us to understand it first. Something moved in his face. You're very perceptive, he said. I'm a navigator, she said. It's my job to know exactly where things are. He left them in the building with the cold tea, saying he'd be back at midday, which gave them time to debrief and regroup. He said it with the ease of someone who was not worried about them using the time productively because he had prepared for that too. When he was gone, Nami looked at Luffy. He's not wrong about everything, she said. No, Luffy agreed. He might be wrong about the solution. Definitely wrong about that, Luffy said. He's intelligent and he's patient and he's been on this island for 2 years and he knows its systems better than we do, she said. She was counting the problems, building her chart in real time. The resonance chambers are the critical variable. If we don't understand them, we can't navigate around them. Robin will know something, Luffy said. That's what I'm counting on. She stood and moved to the entrance, looked out at the ruins. The morning had deepened into a warm late morning light, the kind that made the moss look almost beautiful. She pulled out the snail and keyed the secondary frequency. Robin, come in. The snail's eyes opened after a moment. Nami, Robin's voice, calm as still water. We've found the plateau. There are structures here that I want to examine. Also, a pause. Frankie found the activation system. For the chambers. A longer pause. You know about the chambers. We've met Vareth. Then you know more than we do. We found a control structure, mechanical, old, but something recent has been added to it. Frankie says it's been reconfigured. Can he disable it? The sound of Frankie's voice in the background muffled. Then Robin again. He says he needs 2 hours and he will require you to not ask how. Nami looked at Luffy. Luffy nodded once. Tell him 2 hours, she said. Tell him to be careful. Tell him if he blows up the island while we're on it, I will itemize the damage against his cola budget for the next 3 years. The snail relayed this. The sound of Frankie's muffled response was enthusiastic and slightly alarmed in equal measure. She closed the line. Keyed the frequency for Sanji's team. Got a clean response. They were on the eastern side, no contact. Usopp had found something in the ruins he was being dramatic about and Chopper was preventing him from touching it. 2 hours, she said to Luffy. Before Frankie either disables the system or decorates the island with himself. We should look at the calendar again, Luffy said. She looked at him. You said he wanted us to understand the island before he talked to us, Luffy said. So we understand it ourselves first. The calendar. You said someone was in the middle of counting and just stopped. What were they counting? She thought about it. About the concentric rings. About the stopped cycle. About an island that had been abandoned not in disaster but in abruptness, a city simply vacated, and a calendar marking something that had reached its exact middle point. Cycles, she said slowly. Multiple overlapping cycles. The outer ring, the longest cycle, was complete. The inner ones were at various stages. She was building the picture as she spoke, the way she built weather models, assembling variables. What if the outer ring completing was the trigger? What if the whole civilization was built around waiting for a specific moment, the completion of the largest cycle, and when it came, they left? Luffy said. Or were called, she said. Somewhere else. Somewhere the cycle was pointing to. The chambers, Luffy said. What if that's what they were for? Not for war. For the moment the outer cycle completed, a signal. Something to broadcast. She stared at him. He's been trying to use them as weapons, she said. But that wasn't what they were built for. Weapons made from something that was supposed to do something else, Luffy said, usually don't work as well as the person using them thinks. She grabbed her notebook. Started writing. She could feel the shape of something, not complete, not yet, but present, the outline of a counter-argument not built from muscle or hockey or rubber and bone but from understanding the island better than Vareth did, because he had spent 2 years learning to use it, and she had spent 2 hours learning what it actually was, and in her experience that was frequently enough. We need Robin to look at these markings before midday, she said. I'll call her, Luffy said. Don't call her. Go get her. She looked up from the notebook. Run. He was already gone, feet light on the old stone, moving through the ruins at a speed that stirred the air behind him. She sat in the building with the 2 cold cups of tea and the ancient walls and the open sky above and wrote everything she was thinking in clear, precise lines, building her map of the situation the way she built every map, from the edges inward, from the known toward the unknown, trusting the method even when the territory was new. Outside, the island waited. Something beneath the stone floor hummed, barely perceptible, at a frequency just below what the ear could consciously register but not below what the body could feel. She felt it. She wrote it down. Chapter 4. The Admiral's Argument. Robin arrived at a run, which was something Nami had seen perhaps twice in 2 years and which communicated the urgency of the situation more efficiently than anything she could have said. She had 3 books opened simultaneously, held by extra hands blooming from her shoulders and forearms, the pages fan wide, her actual hands free to gesture as she moved through the entrance and went directly to the calendar wall without preamble. Her eyes moved across the markings with the specific velocity of someone who had already been thinking about exactly this problem and needed only the physical confirmation to close the loop. Luffy came in behind her, and then Zoro. She hadn't asked for Zoro, but he was there, and she didn't send him back, because his being there was information about his assessment of the situation, and his assessments were rarely wrong. Frankie was presumably on the plateau doing things she told him not to explain. Tell me what you found, Nami said to Robin. Robin put one hand flat against the calendar wall and ran her fingers along the innermost ring, the stopped one, the mid-cycle. Her expression had the quality it carried when she was translating from several dead languages simultaneously, and checking each reading against the others before speaking. The civilization called themselves the Murin, she said. I found their name in a foundation inscription on the plateau. They were here for approximately 2,000 years before the abandonment. She traced a section of the outer ring. This outermost ring is a cycle of 2,000 years. It completed, here, at the exact point they stopped. The inner rings are shorter cycles nested inside it. She moved her hand to the innermost ring. This one, the one that stopped mid-rotation, is a 20-year cycle. The last activation of the chamber system. Activation for what? Nami said. Communication, Robin said. Nami stopped writing. The chambers were not weapons and not defense mechanisms, Robin continued. They were a broadcast system. The Murin built this island as a relay station, a signal tower, essentially, operating on frequencies that travel through stone and sea floor. When the outer cycle completed, they used the chambers to send a signal. The mid-cycle stop on the inner ring means the last signal was sent 20 years into the outer cycle's completion, so approximately 2,000 years ago, and then never repeated. Because they left, Nami said. Because they were answered, Robin said. She said it quietly, with the particular quality she gave to things that genuinely surprised her. There's an inscription on the plateau. I found it under 30 years of moss. It says, "We sent and were received. We are going to what received us." That's the closest translation I can manage. She looked at Nami. They built this entire island to send a message. When it was answered, they went toward the answer. The building was very quiet. And Vareth, Nami said. Vareth found the mechanical heart of the system, Robin said, and spent 2 years learning to operate it. He is not wrong that he can use it. The chambers do produce effects in people. The Murin's technology worked on resonance. Specific frequencies affect specific neurological functions. She paused. Sound can make people feel. The right frequency, delivered at sufficient amplitude through stone that has been engineered to direct it, can produce memory, Luffy said. Everyone looked at him. I can feel it, he said. He was standing in the center of the floor, both feet planted, and he had a look on his face that was neither distressed nor uncertain but deeply, carefully attentive. It's running right now. Low. A frequency that makes you think about things. He looked at Nami. The kinds of things he'd want us thinking about before he makes his argument. Robin looked at the floor. He has it running at minimal amplitude, she said. Priming, rather than direct effect. Nostalgia, perhaps. Or grief. Or doubt, Nami said. Or doubt. Robin agreed. Zoro had said nothing. He was standing near the wall with his arms crossed and his eyes tracking the room with the flat, patient attention of someone doing continuous threat assessment. He looked at Nami now. Can Frankie shut it off? From the plateau control structure, yes, Robin said. He'll need time. He's up there now, Nami said. How long? He said 2 hours. That was 20 minutes ago. Then 1 hour and 40 minutes. Zoro said. He looked at Luffy. We need to keep Vareth talking until then. He wants to talk, Luffy said. That's fine. The problem is his argument, Nami said. She tapped her notebook. He's not wrong about everything. That's what makes him dangerous. He's going to stand there and say true things in a sequence that leads to a false conclusion, and he's going to do it while the chambers are running at low amplitude, making everyone feel uncertain, and he needs us to feel that uncertainty so that when he escalates the system, he can present himself as the resolution. Robin said. Yes. Luffy looked at Nami with an expression she recognized as him fully arriving at a decision. Then we don't feel uncertain. That's not how ambient frequency manipulation, Nami, he said. She looked at him. I know what I feel, he said simply. He can run whatever frequency he wants. I know what I feel and I know what's mine, and no amount of stone vibrating under my feet is going to confuse those two things. He said it without aggression, without defensiveness, with the same quality he brought to the most fundamental truths about himself. And you know what you know. Right. She held his gaze. Right, she said. Then we go talk to him, Luffy said. Vareth was waiting in the square when they came out of the building. He had placed himself with the calendar wall at his back, which Nami noted and filed immediately. He'd chosen the position that made the island's history a backdrop for his argument, the visual context working for him before he said a single word. He was good at this. She respected it the way she respected dangerous weather, fully, with no illusions about what respect meant in practical terms. He looked at Luffy. He looked at Nami. He looked at Zoro and Robin, either of which seemed to surprise him, though he hadn't expected them specifically. Your people have found the control structure, he said to Nami. Yes, she said. You've been thorough. I expected no less. He gestured at the square. Another chair had appeared, placed beside the table that someone had moved out here, and 2 more camp chairs unfolded beside it. Sit if you like. I'll stand, Zoro said. As you prefer. Vareth sat in his chair and looked at the assembled 4 of them with an expression of genuine engagement, the expression of someone who had been alone on an island for 2 years and found the company, even under these circumstances, not unwelcome. I'll ask you to hear me completely before responding. Can you do that? Within reason, Nami said. He nodded. He looked at his hands for a moment, then back up. I want to tell you about a town called Licanti, he said. Nobody said anything. Licanti was a port town on the first half of the Grand Line, he said. Population 8,000. Fishing community, merchant traffic, a shipyard that built some of the finest mid-range vessels on that stretch of sea. 12 years ago, the son of the local lord got into a dispute with a visiting pirate crew. The pirate crew had a captain who had eaten a devil fruit. He paused. The dispute lasted 4 days. At the end of it, Licanti had 512 people left. The shipyard was rubble. The fishing boats, every one, had been sunk in the harbor. The square was very still. I was dispatched to handle the aftermath. Vareth continued. I arrived 6 days after the last survivor was pulled from the wreckage. I spent 3 weeks there, organizing the relief effort, cataloging what had happened. I spoke to every surviving witness. He looked at Luffy directly. The pirate captain wasn't a bad person, by their own account. They were protecting their crew. They had simply no ceiling. No limit on what they'd do for the people they cared about. And so they did everything. And Licanti was the cost. Luffy was listening. I'm not telling you this to accuse you of being that captain, Vareth said. I'm telling you because I need you to understand the specific fear I'm working from. Power without structure is not inherently evil. It is, however, inherently unpredictable. An unpredictable power at scale. He gestured at the ruins around them. Produces concluded things. Licanti wasn't us, Nami said. No, he agreed. It wasn't. But the Revolutionary Army's argument for acceleration is built on examples like you, proof that the old order is already fracturing, that the time for change is now. If that argument wins and the timeline is advanced by a decade, the number of Licantis multiplies by a factor that I cannot accept. He leaned forward. I am not a cruel man, Nami. I am a man doing mathematics. And the mathematics say that you need to be stopped now, clearly, visibly, in a way that becomes the counter-argument to the Revolutionary Army's thesis. And you chose this island to do it, she said. The chambers do not harm people, he said. At the frequencies I intend to use, and I want to be completely honest with you about this, they produce a state of absolute emotional clarity. Every feeling brought to the surface, every memory available simultaneously, with none of the protective filtering that the mind normally provides. He said it with clinical precision. In that state, most people find that their certainties dissolve. Not permanently, but visibly. Long enough for me to record it, long enough for a witness to see that the Straw Hat Pirates, when faced with the truth of what they are, cannot hold their shape. That's your plan, Zoro said. His voice had the quality of a sword being drawn in a quiet room. That's my plan, Vareth confirmed. You want to watch us fall apart in front of witnesses, Nami said. I want the world to see that you are people, Vareth said, and for the first time his voice carried something that she was startled to recognize as genuine pain. Not symbols. People. With fears and losses and doubts that the frequency will surface. Because if the world keeps building you into something invincible, something absolute, what comes after the world government falls will simply build new invincible symbols and new absolutes, and the cycle. He looked at the calendar wall behind him. Continues. Silence. Nami thought about what he'd said. She ran it through her navigator's mind, looking for the currents beneath the surface statement, the real information hidden in the shape of the argument. You're not wrong, she said. Robin, slightly to her left, said nothing, but the quality of her attention changed. Zoro looked at her. "You're not wrong that power without ceiling is dangerous," she said. "You're not wrong that building people into symbols is its own kind of violence. You're not wrong about the Revolutionary Army's timeline problem or the risk of acceleration." She held his gaze. "But your solution is wrong because your diagnosis is incomplete." Vareth looked at her with the focused attention of someone who'd expected pushback and had prepared for it. "Go on," he said. "You watched Lecanti and concluded that uncapped power is the disease," she said. "But Lecanti wasn't caused by power without ceiling. It was caused by a captain with power who had no one around them capable of saying stop. The difference," she glanced at Luffy briefly, involuntarily, "is the crew. The crew doesn't stop him," Vareth said. "He decides and they follow. That's not what we do," she said, and something in her voice sharpened past its professional edge into something personal and certain. "I have redirected this crew's course, literally, 14 times this year based on my navigation assessments, and not once has that been questioned. Zoro has told Luffy he's wrong to his face more times than I can count, and not once has Luffy hit him for it. Robin has identified exits from situations that Luffy was prepared to fight to the last person standing in, and he has taken those exits." She paused. "What you watched at Lecanti was power without trust. What you're looking at now is different." Vareth was quiet. "The crew is the ceiling," she said. "Not rules. Not structures. People. Specific, accountable people who will say stop when stop is what's needed. That is how this works. That is the thing your mathematics is missing." The square absorbed her words. Vareth looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Luffy. "Is she right?" he said. "Yeah," Luffy said. "You've stopped," Vareth said. "For your crew. When they were right," Luffy said. "Which is most of the time. And when they're wrong? Then I'm the ceiling," Luffy said, without any particular emphasis, the way you'd say something that was simply a fact of the physical world. "That's how it goes." Vareth was quiet for several more seconds. And then, not capitulating, not conceding, but recalculating, he said, "That's a more interesting answer than I prepared for." "Good," Luffy said. "It doesn't change my operational decision," Vareth said. "Because even if you're right about the mechanism, even if the crew functions as you describe, it doesn't change the Revolutionary Army's use of your image. It doesn't change what the world builds from the story of Luffy, divorced from the nuance of the crew dynamic." He reached into his coat and produced a device, small, mechanical, a modification of what she recognized as a Den Mushi activation trigger, and set it on the table between them. "The chambers are already at low amplitude. I can bring them to full operational capacity from here." Everyone looked at the device. "You should know," he said, "that at full capacity the effect is not painful. It is simply overwhelming. Your crew members across the island are within the chamber network's range. They will all be affected simultaneously." He looked at the device. "I'd like you to understand that I take no pleasure in this. I think you are remarkable people. But remarkable people serving the wrong moment in history are still the wrong catalyst." Nami looked at the device. Then at Luffy. Luffy's hands were in his pockets. He was looking at Vareth with the expression he wore when he was fully ready, not angry, not excited, just present and decided. She waited for him to stretch, to move, to close the distance between himself and Vareth or the device in the single motion that would end the conversation physically. He didn't move. "Nami," he said. "Working on it," she said. Because she was. She had been building the counterargument in real time throughout the entire conversation, and it had taken its full shape approximately 40 seconds ago, and now she needed 30 seconds and the snail. She pulled the Den Mushi from her coat. Vareth watched her. "You said the chambers were built for communication," she said, keying the frequency. "Not for weapons. That the Murin built them to send a signal and left when they were answered." "Your historian is thorough," Vareth said. She is, Nami agreed. Frankie. The snail opened. Static, then Frankie's voice, lower than usual, careful. Nami. Yeah. I'm at the control structure. Can you activate the outer broadcast sequence? A pause. The full broadcast? The signal function? Yeah, I've had that identified for about 40 minutes, but you said to disable the don't disable it, she said. Activate the broadcast. Full outer cycle signal. Can you do that? Another pause. She could hear him moving, the careful sound of someone handling very old mechanisms with the respect of someone who understood what they built. Give me 4 minutes. You have 3, she said, and closed the snail. She looked at Vareth. Vareth was looking at her with an expression that had shifted, the recalculation again, deeper this time, the addition of a variable he hadn't accounted for. What are you doing? He said. Not a question. A statement of someone working it out as he spoke. The chambers at full broadcast produced their designed effect, she said. Not the effect you've been using them for, the emotional exposure, the surface effect of the modified frequencies. Their designed effect. A signal that travels through stone and sea floor at frequencies the Murin spent 2,000 years perfecting. That doesn't affect mine, no, she agreed. It doesn't stop you. It doesn't disable your device. It doesn't prevent you from activating the weapon frequency. She held his gaze steadily. But it means that whatever you do next, you do it while the island is broadcasting what it was built to broadcast. To whatever received the Murin 2,000 years ago. She paused. I don't know what's going to receive it this time. I don't think you know either. But I'm willing to find out, and I don't think you are. The square was absolutely still. Vareth looked at the device on the table. Then he looked at her with the expression of someone who had spent 8 years preparing for a specific conversation, and was now in a different conversation entirely. That's a bluff, he said. Is it? She said. Beneath their feet the stone began to hum. Not the low, barely perceptible frequency from before, this was different, deeper, a resonance that you felt in your jaw and the backs of your knees and the center of your chest simultaneously, building in amplitude with a clean, purposeful rise that said, this is what I was made for. The moss on the walls trembled. The carved markings on the calendar wall caught the mid-morning light differently as the stone's surface vibrated, the geometry of them suddenly more visible, more intentional. Vareth stood up. He was not afraid, she gave him that, he was genuinely not afraid. But he was paying attention to something he hadn't planned for, which was the only kind of attention that mattered right now. The broadcast sequence takes approximately 2 minutes to reach full amplitude, Nami said, because she'd read it in her notes from what Robin had told her. After that, whatever it's going to do, it does. She looked at him. You have 2 minutes to decide whether you want to be in the middle of that. You don't know what it does either, he said. No, she said. But I know what it was built for. Communication. Not destruction. She met his eyes. Your chambers were built for the same thing. You modified them for something else. That's the core of your problem. You took something built for connection and tried to use it to isolate people from themselves. She gestured at the ruins around them, the city that had waited 2,000 years to send its message. That's not what this island is for. Vareth looked at the device on the table for a long, considered moment. The humming deepened. The light in the square did something, not changed, exactly, but became more present, as though the frequency was affecting the quality of perception itself, the way the Murin had apparently intended it to, the broadcast function producing its designed effect of clarity rather than the confusion of the modified weapon setting. Nami felt it. The clarity was not dramatic. It was simple, the uncomplicated arrival of knowing exactly where you were standing and why. She looked at Luffy. He was looking at her. Not at Vareth. Not at the device. At her, with the expression she'd been cataloging for 2 years and had finally begun to read correctly, the one that wasn't about rubber or hunger or adventure but about the specific, irreplaceable person standing in front of him, the one he'd spent 2 hours on the figurehead this morning finding the right words for. She looked back at Vareth. Move the device, she said. He looked at it. He picked it up. He held it for a moment, and she could see what it cost him, the 8 years of preparation, the mathematical certainty of his plan, the genuine conviction that this was the right thing, that the world's best outcome required this sacrifice. And then he set it down again, on his side of the table, out of reach of anyone but himself. You've made your argument, he said. I have, she said. It doesn't resolve the actual problem, he said. The Revolutionary Army's timeline. The risk of acceleration. The fragility of the transition. No, she agreed. One argument in a ruined square doesn't resolve a systemic problem. But neither does making examples of people. She looked at him levelly. You know that. That's why you wanted us to understand first. Because you knew, before you ever made this plan, that it wouldn't actually work the way you needed it to. The humming from the stone peaked and held, a sustained note that was almost musical, almost recognizable, almost something. And then, with the particular completeness of designed function executing perfectly after 2,000 years, the signal went out. Not with drama. Not with light or seismic activity or anything visual. Just with the absolute certainty, felt rather than seen, that something had left this island and was traveling somewhere at a speed and through a medium that none of their instruments could measure. The square was silent after it. Vareth sat back down in his chair. He looked older than he had at the start of the conversation, but not defeated. The distinction between those two things was important, and she read it clearly. He looked like a man reassessing. Your navigator, he said to Luffy, is extraordinary. I know, Luffy said. You knew she'd find the counter-argument. She finds the way through everything, Luffy said. The simplicity of it, no elaboration, no performance, just the bedrock certainty of someone who knew exactly what they were sailing with. Nami looked at her notebook. Looked at her notes. Looked at the calendar wall still vibrating faintly with the aftermath of 2,000 years of held potential finally released. She thought about what Vareth had said, remarkable people serving the wrong moment in history, and she thought about the Murin, who had spent 2,000 years building something just to send one message to something they couldn't see yet, trusting that what received them was worth going toward. What happens now? Zoro said. He'd been silent for the entire argument, standing against the wall, but she'd felt him there the whole time, the steady, grounded weight of him. Vareth looked at the device in his hand. Then, with a deliberateness that was not resignation but decision, he put it in his coat. Now I recalculate, he said. I have 8 years of work and a flawed central assumption. He looked at Nami. The crew as ceiling rather than power without limit. I'll need to rebuild the model. That'll take time, she said. I have spent 8 years on a deserted island, he said. I'm good at time. From the plateau above the ruins, there was a sound that could charitably be described as a controlled explosion and less charitably as Frankie doing exactly what Nami had told him not to do, followed by Frankie's voice carrying clear and bright across the whole island. That was completely intentional, and it is fine and also super. The stone beneath their feet went quiet. The low ambient frequency, the priming effect, the doubt amplifier, stopped entirely. The air in the square felt simply like air again. Nami looked at Luffy. He was grinning. The real one, full and unguarded, and it was aimed directly at her, and she felt the thing in her chest that she'd been keeping in a very organized drawer do something final and irreversible, something she didn't try to stop. She looked back at her notebook. We should check on Usopp, she said. He's fine, Luffy said. He's probably not fine. He's probably mostly fine, Luffy said. The snail in her coat went off, Usopp's voice high and cracking. Nami, I need you to know that whatever Chopper is about to tell you I had nothing to do with the statue. Chopper's voice in the background. You absolutely did. She looked at Luffy. Mostly fine, he said. Get moving, she told him, and she was already walking, notebook open, pen out, writing the things that needed to be written and leaving the rest, for now, for a little longer, in the space between moving forward and having arrived. Behind her she heard Varys say, quietly, to nobody in particular, She kept walking. Chapter 5. What Luffy understands. The statue was a pelican. Not a real pelican, a carved stone pelican approximately 3 meters tall, positioned at the Eastern District's central junction with its wings spread and its beak open in what Usopp was insisting was a threatening posture and Chopper was insisting was decorative and which had, based on the evidence currently visible, recently been relocated from its original foundation by approximately 4 meters due to what Usopp described as an unavoidable navigational collision and Chopper described as Usopp running directly into it because he wasn't watching where he was going. Nami looked at the pelican. She looked at its former foundation, which was a clean circular impression in the ground with 4 bolt holes that corresponded to nothing currently around it. She looked at the pelican's current position, which was the middle of a path. She looked at Usopp. It moved first, Usopp said. It is a stone pelican, Sanji said. On this island, Usopp said with some dignity. Nami looked at Chopper, who gave her a small, honest shake of his head that communicated he ran into it. She made a note, not about the pelican, but about the path junction, which her map of the Eastern District needed and which the pelican's original position had helpfully marked as a significant node in the district's layout. Then she looked at the pelican's current position and decided that if it had any spiritual or architectural significance to the Murin it would survive the afternoon, and if it didn't, it was a large rock in a path that they would step around. Leave it, she said. See? Usopp told Chopper. I said nothing in your favor, Nami told him. They moved on. The afternoon had taken on a different quality after the broadcast. She noticed it first in the light. The island's particular filtered brightness had shifted, something removed from it or something added, and after 20 minutes she identified it as the absence of the ambient frequency that had been running beneath everything since they docked. Varitha's priming effect, gone now thanks to Frankie's plateau work. What remained was the island without modification, and the island without modification was, she found, considerably less ominous than the island with it. Old, yes. Abandoned, yes. Strange in the way of places built by people who understood the world through frameworks completely unlike anything she'd encountered. But not threatening. There was something almost settled about it now, a quality she associated with things that had done what they were built to do and could rest. The broadcast signal was out there somewhere. Traveling. She didn't know through what or toward what, and she noted this in her log with the same notational discipline she applied to everything. Unknown variable, monitor for response, adjust heading if required. That was all she could do. All anyone could do with genuinely unknown variables was stay alert and keep moving. She was mapping the Eastern District with the methodical attention she gave to any new island, not because Murugain was on any trade route or because they'd be returning, but because the habit of documentation was one she'd built so deep into her practice that it operated independently of conscious decision. She mapped things because the world was better understood mapped. Because a chart was a promise you made to anyone who came after you. I was here, I looked carefully, this is what I found. Sanji fell into step beside her. They walked for a moment in the companionable silence that she and Sanji had developed over years, the silence of two people who were capable of talking about everything and sometimes chose to say things through proximity and direction and the particular care with which one of them occasionally offered the other a cup of something hot at exactly the right moment. You were good in there, he said eventually. She glanced at him. His profile was composed, looking forward, and the particular pain she'd seen in his face this morning in the galley had settled into something more considered, not gone, not resolved, but processed. Sanji processed things through cooking and through movement, and apparently, she was observing, through watching her work. Varith was manageable, she said. Not what I meant, he said. She kept walking. Her pen moved across the map. A section of wall here, an alley there, the regularity of the Eastern District's street plan becoming visible as she documented it. Sanji, she said. I know, he said. I know what it is and I know what it isn't, and I'm not going to make it into something complicated for anyone. I just wanted to say. He stopped. Tried again. You deserve someone who knows what they have, he said. And he knows. He always knew. He's just built differently. I used to think that was a deficiency. A pause. I was wrong about that. She looked at him. He was looking at the ruins around them with the expression of someone who had done the full accounting of a situation and arrived at a number they hadn't wanted but could accept. There was something genuinely graceful about it, about Sanji specifically, that she appreciated. The way his extravagance of feeling, which could be so exhausting in its daily expression, produced in real moments of emotional weight a response that was clean and unperformative. Thank you, she said. Also, he said, with the slight return of his usual register, I'm going to make something extraordinary for dinner tonight as a coping mechanism, and everyone is going to benefit from my suffering, so. Good, she said. Genuinely exceptional, he confirmed, and they walked on. She found Zoro on the western edge of the ruins near the cliff line, sitting on a low wall with his arms on his knees, looking at the sea. He was the only one of the crew who had moved instinctively toward the island's perimeter, toward the exit point, the water, and she noticed but not commented on it until now. She sat beside him on the wall. The sea from this side of the island was a different character than the harbor side, open, unprotected, the full weight of the Grand Line's water running long and dark to a horizon with no land in it. The wind was clean and direct. It was the kind of view that made you feel both very small and very present at the same time, and Zoro, she had learned, was someone who sought out that specific combination when he needed to think. He got to you, she said. Zoro didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. Licanti, she said. Not because of what he said about Luffy, Zoro said. I know what Luffy is and what he isn't. He was looking at the water with the flat steadiness that was his default expression, but the set of his jaw was doing something. I was thinking about my hawk. She waited. The ceiling argument, he said. Power without limit. I've spent my entire life pushing against whatever limit I'm at. That's the whole project. He was quiet for a moment. And Vareth walks in and makes an argument that the project itself is the problem. That someone trying to get to the top of something with no ceiling is inherently dangerous. He was making the argument about Luffy, she said. He was making the argument about anyone. Zoro looked at his hands, at the calluses, the old cuts, the particular worn-in quality of hands that had been doing one specific thing for 20 years. The frequency was running and I was sitting in that square and I thought, for about 30 seconds, that he was right. Not about stopping Luffy. About the whole direction. Whether any of this, the pushing, the getting stronger, the no limit, whether it produces anything worth the cost. She looked at him. And then you started talking, he said. And I remembered what the ceiling actually was. He glanced at her sideways. You told him. The crew. The people around the power are the ceiling. Not rules or the Marines or fear. People. I did tell him that, she said. You were right, he said. The words landed simply, without any of the difficulty that Zoro usually had with acknowledging being right about something or someone else being right. Which meant it had cost him something, the frequency, probably, and the specific vulnerability of having his doubts surfaced in a way he couldn't quite control, and the acknowledgement was his way of paying the costs cleanly. She didn't make much of it. That was the right way to receive something from Zoro. The world's greatest swordsman doesn't have to be the world's most destructive force, she said. Those are different things. He looked at the water. Yeah, he said. She stood. Come back to the center. I want everyone together before we deal with Varetha's next move. He's not done, Zoro said. Not a question. He recalculates, she said. He said it himself. He's been on this island for 2 years. He doesn't have the experience of being wrong mid-plan and adapting. He'll take tonight to rebuild his model and tomorrow he'll come back with something different. She looked at the sea. We need to be off this island before tomorrow. Zoro got up from the wall without another word and they walked back through the ruins together. The crew gathered in the central square at 4 o'clock. Vareth was not there. He had disappeared into the island's northern structures after their conversation in the square, and her team had tracked his general location but not closed the distance, which suited her. She wanted to know where he was, but she didn't want him inside the crew's debrief. She stood in front of the calendar wall and looked at all of them. Frankie had a bandage on his left hand that he was pretending wasn't there. The controlled explosion on the plateau had been, by his own admission in a private moment to Nami, slightly less controlled than described. The important thing was that the weapon frequency system was disabled, not destroyed, because she told him not to destroy it, but disconnected at the activation layer, which meant Vareth still had his device, but the device currently activated nothing. That was temporary. He'd reconnect it eventually. Hence the timeline. She laid it out for them with the same directness she used for weather briefings. Here is what we know, here is what we don't, here is the priority sequence. The broadcast went out, she said. Robin's assessment is that it's done what it was supposed to do and won't affect us further. The weapon frequency system is disconnected. Vareth is operational, but his primary instrument is temporarily offline. She looked at her notes. He is intelligent, he is adaptive, and he has resources we haven't fully mapped. He will repair the disconnect. The question is not if but when, and my estimate is before morning. Then we leave tonight, Luffy said. He was sitting on the base of the stone table, feet on the ground, hat pushed back. Looking at her. We leave tonight, she confirmed. I want to be on the water by 9. That means we finish our documentation of the island in the next 2 hours, get back to the Sunny, and prepare for night's sailing. She looked at Zoro. I need someone watching Vareth until we're ready to move. Done, Zoro said. Robin, everything you can photograph and note from the plateau structures in the next 90 minutes. I want as complete a record as we can manage. Of course, Robin said. Frankie, Sunny's in perfect condition, Frankie said. I checked her at 2. She's ready when you are. She nodded. Looked at the group. Questions? Usopp raised his hand. What about Vareth? What about him? Are we just leaving him here? On the island? Alone? She considered it. It was a legitimate question, carrying the particular moral weight that Usopp sometimes raised. Not cowardly, not dramatic, but genuine. He chose to be here, she said. He planned to be here. He has supplies and structures and 2 years of established presence on this island. She paused. He's also not going to follow us. His plan required the island's systems. Without them, at least temporarily, he has no mechanism. He could rebuild, Usopp said. He'll rebuild, she said. But that takes time, and what we do in that time is our own business. She looked at Luffy. Luffy was quiet for a moment. He was thinking about something. She could see it in the way his eyes had gone slightly elsewhere, following a thread. Then he looked up. I want to talk to him again, he said. Before we leave. The square was quiet. Luffy, Zoro said. Not a fight, Luffy said. A conversation. Just me. He looked at Nami. Can you give me an hour? She looked at him. She ran the calculation, the timeline, the risk, the probability that Vareth would use a private conversation with Luffy differently than he'd use the group conversation, and whether that was dangerous or whether. 1 hour, she said. Zoro goes with you to the boundary. I'll be fine alone. Zoro goes to the boundary, she said. It wasn't a negotiation. Something in his expression shifted, not resistance, but the specific acknowledgement of someone who recognized the difference between I don't need protection and someone who loves you needs to know you're in range, and who had the grace to understand those were different things. Okay, he said. He found Vareth in the northern structure, a building that had been the Murin's equivalent of a library, Robin had said, based on the shelving indentations in the walls, most empty now, a few still holding the fossilized remains of whatever documents they'd once stored. Vareth had set up his personal camp here, which told Luffy things about him: the choice of a library, the organization of the space, the way he placed his equipment with the same geometric precision he'd placed the chairs in the square. Vareth looked up when Luffy came in. He was sitting at a portable work table, and on the table was his device, open, being worked on, the reconnection already underway. He didn't hide this. "I expected your navigator," Vareth said. "She's doing other things," Luffy said. Vareth put his tool down. He looked at Luffy with the expression he'd worn since the square, the recalculation running continuously, the ongoing update of a model that had encountered too many unexpected variables to maintain its original shape. Luffy sat on the floor cross-legged, which put him below Vareth's eye level and which was not a tactical position but was a comfortable one, and Luffy had long since stopped adjusting his physical comfort to other people's ideas about posture and hierarchy. "You fought with Garp," Luffy said. Vareth was still for a moment. "He mentioned me?" "He didn't talk about specific people much," Luffy said. "But the way he trained me, the way he talked about the Marines he respected, I can recognize the type." He looked at Vareth directly. "You were one of the good ones." "I was effective," Vareth said. "That's not the same thing and you know it," Luffy said. Vareth looked at him. "The good ones hated what it was becoming," Luffy said. "The celestial dragons. The way justice got used. They stayed because they thought staying meant they could keep some of it worth keeping." He paused. "And then one day the cost of staying was higher than what was worth keeping and they had to go." Vareth was quiet. "Garp stayed," Luffy said. "Longer than he should have. I know that about him even without him telling me directly." He looked at the device on the table, the half-reconnected activation system, the patient work of a methodical man. "You left. That was probably right. The leaving wasn't the problem," Vareth said. "The problem was what I left toward. 8 years alone on a plan that became wrong," Luffy said. Vareth's jaw moved. "I'm not making fun of it," Luffy said. "I've been wrong about things. I've been wrong in ways that cost people a lot." He was looking at his hands for a moment. The difference between wrong and catastrophically wrong is usually whether you were listening while it was happening. "I was listening," Vareth said, with the first real edge Luffy had heard in his voice. "I listened for 8 years. I read every report, every historical account, every analysis of Revolutionary Army movement and world government response pattern. I built the most complete predictive model of post-collapse outcomes anyone has ever assembled." "You were listening to information," Luffy said. "Not to people." Vareth stopped. "The thing you miss," Luffy said, "isn't in any report. It's, Nami told you. The crew as the ceiling. But it goes further than that." He looked up from his hands at Vareth. "The reason it works isn't a mechanism. It's not a structure. It's because everyone on this ship chose to be there. Nobody was assigned. Nobody was drafted. They looked at what this crew was and they decided yes, that. And then they stayed. Not because they had to. Because they wanted to." He paused. "That's the thing that makes it different from Lecanti. That's the thing that makes it different from the world government, and the Marines and the Revolutionary Army, and every other organization trying to manage the world from the top down. We're not managing anything. We're just going together." Vareth was looking at him with the expression of someone receiving information they didn't have a prior category for. "You're 20 years old," Vareth said. "Yeah," Luffy said. "You talk like someone who has been thinking about this for decades." "I don't think about it," Luffy said. "I just know it. There's a difference." He looked at Vareth steadily. "Your plan to dismantle us, it was never going to work. Not because we're too strong to be dismantled. Because what you'd be showing the world, if you made us look uncertain or afraid or human, you'd be showing them that people like us, people who chose each other and chose this, can still be human and still keep going. That's not a counter-argument to hope. That's just more evidence for it." The library was very quiet. Outside, the late afternoon light was falling across the ruins in long strips, golden and specific, the way light fell in old places where the angles of things had been shaped by hands that knew exactly where the light came from at what time of year. Vareth looked at his device. He looked at it for a long time. Then he picked it up and closed it, not reconnected, not activated, closed, and set it on the far side of the table. "You're going to leave tonight," he said. "Yes," Luffy said. "And you think I should stay?" "I think you should do whatever you actually want to do," Luffy said. "Not what your model says to do. What you want." Vareth was quiet for a moment. "I want the transition to go well," he said. "I want the world on the other side of the world governance collapse to be better than what it's replacing. I want the millions of people who have no say in any of this to survive it." "Then work on that," Luffy said. "Not on us." "You're not concerned that I'll simply rebuild and try again?" Vareth said. "You'll rebuild?" Luffy said. "Whether you try again is your decision." He stood from the floor, easy and unhurried. "But you already know the central premise was wrong. You said it yourself, you need to recalculate." He looked at Vareth. "You're a smart person. Recalculate towards something that actually helps." Vareth looked up at him from the work table. In the long afternoon light he looked like what he was, a very intelligent person who had spent 8 years alone and was now confronting the full weight of that solitude in the form of a 20-year-old in a straw hat who had just disassembled his entire philosophical framework in approximately 15 minutes. "You're not what I expected," Vareth said. "People say that," Luffy said. He turned toward the entrance. "Luffy." He looked back. "Your navigator," Vareth said. "She's the most important variable in your operation. Not your power. Her." He paused. "Don't let the sea take her." Luffy looked at him for a moment. "The sea doesn't take things from me," he said. The simplicity of it wasn't arrogance. It was the same fundamental accounting he brought to everything, the statement of a fact he had decided was true and would hold. "Not anymore." He walked out into the ruins. Zoro was at the boundary of the northern structure, leaning against a wall with his eyes closed, which Luffy knew meant he had been fully awake and alert for the entire hour. "Done?" Zoro said. "Done," Luffy said. They walked back through the ruins toward the square, toward the sound of the crew assembling, toward Nami's voice carrying clear and precise across the old stones with the tone she used when she was running a timeline. The Cyan Nami activated at 7:43 in the evening. They were 40 minutes from departure. The Sunny was prepped, the crew was aboard or near aboard, Nami was at the helm running her pre-sailing checks, and everything had the texture of a situation resolving itself cleanly. And then the voice came through the stone. Not through the Den Mushi, through the island itself, through the chamber system that Frankie had disconnected and which Vareth had, in the time between Luffy's visit and now, reconnected with the patience and methodical skill of someone who had built this system for exactly this contingency. But not at the weapon frequency. Not the doubt amplifier, not the emotional exposure setting. The Cyan Nami Vareth's devil fruit ability, she'd found reference to it in a marine file Robin had recovered from the plateau structure, an old personnel document, 2 lines, Admiral Vareth, fruit, Cyan Nami, classification, paramecia, ability, broadcast of any recorded sound across any distance. She'd read it, and filed it, and thought she understood it. She had not understood it. The voices that came through the stone were specific. Each one targeted to a specific person, delivered at the exact personal frequency that the chamber's resonance technology could isolate, the Murin's communication system used as a targeting mechanism. Usopp heard his father's voice. Chopper heard Hylialik. Sanji heard a voice she couldn't identify from where she was standing but which dropped him to his knees. Frankie heard Tom. Robin heard nothing. She stood on the deck with her arms crossed and her eyes open, and Nami understood immediately. Robin had spent 30 years learning to survive the death of every person she'd ever loved, and there was no voice left that could be used against her. She was the only one entirely untouched. Nami heard her mother. Belmir's voice came through the deck boards of the Thousand Sunny with the specific quality of sound that had been stored somewhere beyond memory and retrieved whole, the way smells sometimes retrieved things you hadn't known you'd kept. Not a word. Not a sentence. Just the sound of her mother laughing, the laugh she'd had, the specific one that meant she'd surprised herself, the one that Nami had not heard in so long she thought she might have half invented it. She gripped the ship's wheel. Her knuckles went white. The laugh continued, looping, and she knew what it was. She had the analysis in her notebook, she knew the mechanism, she knew this was a recorded frequency being broadcast through engineered stone, and it was not real, it was not her mother. Her mother was gone. Arlong had taken her when Nami was 10 years old, and she had grieved that and built her life forward from that grief, and it was not real. Her hands were shaking. Nami! She turned. Luffy was standing behind her at the helm. He must have moved fast, faster than she tracked, which meant he'd been watching her from the moment the voices started. His face carried no grin, no lightness, none of the easy warmth. Just direct, present, fully here. He was hearing something too. She could see it in the slight tension around his eyes, not pain, but the specific quality of someone receiving something that cost them. She had a guess, and it cut her deeply to have it, Ace. Or Sabo. Or both. The people who had been taken. He was upright. Both feet on the deck. His hands at his sides, not fists, open, steady. It's Vareth, she said. Her voice came out more even than she expected. He reconnected. The Saiyan know me. He's broadcasting voices of people we've lost through the chamber system. I know, Luffy said. It's not real, she said, more to herself than to him. It's real enough, he said. The love was real. The loss was real. The sound is just the sound. He was looking at her with that expression again, the careful certain one, and she understood something she hadn't before. This was how Luffy held grief. Not by denying it or armoring over it, but by holding it directly, feeling its full weight, and not being destroyed by the weight because he'd decided what was on the other side of it. She took a breath. The laugh continued through the boards beneath her feet. Can you still sail? He said. She looked at the wheel. At the compass. At the log poles pointing southeast away from the island, away from Murugain, toward the rest of the Grand Line and whatever was next. Yes, she said. Then sail, he said. I'll handle Vareth. Luffy. He was already gone, moving across the deck toward the gangplank in that particular way he had when he made a complete decision, not running, not leaping, just moving with the total commitment of someone who had resolved every internal question and was now simply executing. She watched him go. Then she looked at the helm. She looked at the sea. She looked at the night sky above the island, clean and dark and scattered with more stars than any sky she'd seen since an island in the clouds, and she thought about her mother's laugh, really thought about it, let herself hold it fully for the length of 2 breaths, and then she put her hands on the wheel. Frankie, she called. His face appeared from below, red-eyed but upright. Ready. Release the moorings. Nami, Frankie. She looked at him. Release the moorings and get to the sails. Luffy is handling Vareth. We prepare to move. He looked at her for one more moment. Then he nodded and went. Luffy moved through the ruins at full speed, coating his arms without thinking about it, the haki rising naturally because the situation called for it, and Luffy's body had learned a long time ago to respond to necessity without requiring the mind to issue a formal request. He could still hear the voice through the stone beneath his feet. It shifted as he moved, the targeting system tracking him, Vareth keeping it on him, the voice changing from Ace to Sabo to his grandfather laughing and then back to Ace again. He ran through it. Not because it didn't hurt. It hurt in the specific, unmanageable way that losses like that hurt, the kind of hurt you didn't get over so much as build your life adjacent to, and which could still surprise you sometimes with its original force. He ran through it because it was the past, and the past, however much it cost, was not where he was going. He found Vareth in the central square. Not in the library, he'd moved, which was good tactical thinking, creating distance from his previous position. He was standing at the calendar wall with the device in his hand, and the device was open and active, the connection to the chamber system fully restored. He looked at Luffy coming across the square, and his expression was not triumphant and not guilty. It was the expression of a man executing the last step of a plan he decided to complete even after acknowledging its limitations, because he didn't know how to stop mid-step. "I know what you're hearing," Vareth said. "Then you know it's not going to work," Luffy said. He closed the distance fast, not instantly, not in the blurring teleport speed that he was capable of, but at a measured pace, deliberately letting Vareth see him coming, which was its own kind of statement. He was 50 meters away, then 30, then 15. "The voices aren't fiction," Vareth said. "I recorded them from the lives of people who actually knew your crew members. They are real sounds that real people made. The grief they produce is legitimate." "I know," Luffy said. "Then you know that your crew is currently standing," Luffy said. "Or they will be in a minute." He kept walking. 10 meters. "Because they're stronger than their grief. Not because they don't feel it. Because feeling it and standing up are things you can do at the same time." Vareth was watching him come. His finger was on the activation point of his device. "I can escalate," Vareth said. "The full amplitude. Not just resonance, direct neurofrequency. At full capacity, this system can produce something more significant than grief. Complete disorientation, temporal dislocation, do it," Luffy said. Vareth stopped. "I'm serious," Luffy said. He was 5 meters away. He stopped walking. "If you want to show the world that we can be hurt, go ahead. Escalate. Full amplitude, every frequency you have." He looked at Vareth directly. "And then watch what happens after." "What happens after?" Vareth said. "We get up," Luffy said. "That's what happens after." The square was very still. "Every time," Luffy said. "That's all it is. We get hurt, and we get up. Not because we're invincible. Because we decided a long time ago that getting up was going to be the answer to getting knocked down, and that decision doesn't expire." Vareth's hand was still on the device. "Your recorder," Luffy said. "You said you wanted witnesses? You wanted to record us falling apart." He tilted his head slightly. "Record this instead." He reached out and put his hand over the device, not grabbing it, not forcefully, just placing his hand over it with the particular unhurried certainty of someone making a point through presence rather than violence. Vareth looked at his hand. "You could have taken this from me 30 seconds ago," Vareth said. "Yes," Luffy said. "Then why didn't you?" "Because I wanted you to put it down yourself," Luffy said. "There's a difference." The island hummed beneath them. The broadcast was still running, the voices still coming through the stone, the Saiyan Nami doing its work through the chamber system. And from the direction of the harbor, very clearly, came the sound of the 1,000 sunny sails going up, the snap of cloth filling with wind, the deep harmonic of a ship coming fully alive, and then Nami's voice carrying across the stone and the dark and the distance between here and there with the particular commanding clarity that she produced when she meant every syllable. "Luffy! We're ready when you are." He looked at Vareth. Vareth closed the device. Not switched off, closed. Physically shut it, the activation point covered by the housing, the system still connected but the command withdrawn. He held the closed device for a moment, and then he set it on the table. Nami's table, the one that had been here when they arrived, the one he'd put the chairs at and the cold tea on, the table around which they'd had the conversation that had started all of this. "The voices will stop when I stop feeding them," he said. "Yeah," Luffy said. "Your crew will be all right." "They're already all right," Luffy said. Vareth looked at him for a long moment. At 20 years old and a straw hat and open hands and the absolute, settled certainty of someone who had decided what was worth being certain about and had stopped being movable on the subject. "Go," Vareth said. "Not defeated. Decided. Before I recalculate again." Luffy almost smiled. Recalculate towards something good, he said. I'll try, Vera said. He turned and walked back toward the library, toward the quiet and the long work of reassembly, toward the 8 years that needed to become something different. He didn't look back. Luffy stood in the square for a moment, in the silence of the voices stopping, the chamber system going quiet, the frequency and the stone dissolving back into plain stone, just old rock that had held messages for 2,000 years and was resting now. He looked at the calendar wall. The stopped mid-cycle. The outer ring complete. We sent and were received. We are going to what received us. He turned and ran. He hit the gangplank at a full sprint and cleared it in 2 strides and landed on the Sunny's deck, and the gangplank came up behind him with Frankie's hand on the mechanism, and the moorings went last and the Sunny moved. She moved the way she always moved when the sails were full and the wind was right and the navigator had the wheel, with the particular living ease of a ship that was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was built for, carrying exactly the people she was supposed to carry. Nami had them out of the harbor gap and into open water in 4 minutes. Luffy came to the helm. She was looking forward at the night sea, both hands on the wheel, her hair loose and the wind in it, and the island falling behind them in the dark. She didn't look at him when he arrived, but she knew he was there. He'd learned to read her knowing without her looking, the same way he'd learned to navigate the sunny silences. He leaned against the helm housing beside her. Close. Not touching, but in that particular proximity that was its own kind of statement, the kind that said this is where I am without requiring any elaboration. The island of Murugain went dark behind them, falling below the horizon with the finality of concluded things. You okay? He said. She was quiet for a moment. The wheel moved slightly in her hands, a small correction, the water talking and her responding. I heard my mom, she said. He was quiet. Laughing, she said. Just laughing. That specific laugh she had. He didn't say I'm sorry, and he didn't say it wasn't real, and he didn't say anything that would have been the wrong thing, which was why she could talk to him about it. He was just there, beside her, in the dark, on the moving ship. I heard Ace, he said after a while. She closed her eyes for 1 second. Opened them. The horizon was dark and full and going somewhere. Both of them knew, she said. Your mom. Mine. What they were doing and why. Yeah, he said. That's worth something, she said. Yeah, he said again. Different. She kept sailing. The Grand Line opened ahead of them, patient and vast and full of the next thing, and the Sunny went into it the way she always went into everything, forward, with everyone aboard, at the speed that Nami's hands decided was right. After a while she heard him settle more fully against the housing beside her. Not going anywhere. Just there. She let him be there. The stars were extraordinary. Chapter 6. Heading somewhere worth going. 3 days out from Murugain, the sea went blue again. Not the dark, deep blue of the Grand Line's deeper channels or the greenish-black it turned before storms. This was a clear, uncomplicated blue, the kind that existed on the Grand Line only in certain corridors between magnetic zones where the sea forgot, briefly, to be strange. It was warm. The wind was steady and from the right direction. The Thousand Sunny moved through it with the ease of a ship that had been through something and was glad to be on the other side of it. Nami had slept 9 hours the night they left Murugain. She woke to find the heading she'd set was still true, which meant Zoro had taken the helm for the overnight stretch. He never acknowledged doing this, and she never made him, but she'd found her own calculations confirmed 3 mornings in a row and had stopped pretending not to understand what that meant. She made a notation in her log, current favorable, heading maintained, ETA next island approximately 40 hours pending wind variation. Then she went to get coffee. Sanji's cooking, as predicted, had been extraordinary. Not just the night they left but consistently for the following 2 days, the kind of cooking that happened when someone was working through something, each meal slightly more elaborate than the last, the flavors more considered, the presentation carrying the particular care of someone who was converting emotion into craft with focused deliberateness. Nobody commented on this directly. They ate with the gratitude of people who understood they were the beneficiaries of someone else's processing and were decent enough to simply receive it. The crew had returned to itself. Not immediately. There had been a day of careful quiet, each person carrying their own version of what the chambers had surfaced, existing near each other without the usual noise while the residue settled. Usopp had been the first to break it, which was characteristic. He'd appeared at dinner on the second day with a story about what had happened with the pelican that had grown, in the retelling, to involve the pelican moving on its own initiative and attempting to prevent him from discovering an ancient treasure. And the story was completely untrue and everyone knew it, and the laughter it produced was clean and necessary, and that was the end of the quiet. Chopper had cried a little, privately, and then made a point of sitting close to everyone for the day after, not saying much, just present, which was his version of checking that the things he loved were still intact, and they were, and he seemed satisfied. Frankie had built something. She had not asked what. It was on the rear deck under a tarp and occasionally emitted a soft mechanical sound that suggested ongoing process. Robin had read 3 books in 2 days, which was her version of rest, and had occasionally looked up from them to watch the water with an expression of private satisfaction that Nami had learned to read as things are as they should be, which from Robin was not a small statement. Brooke had played, each morning, the song that had been circling without resolving since Murugain. On the 3rd morning she had sat on the deck and listened all the way through, and it had resolved, finally, into something that she didn't have a name for, not sad, not triumphant, just true, the way certain pieces of music were simply true, and when it finished Brooke had lowered his violin and said, "Yo-ho-ho-ho, that one took a while." And she'd said, "It was worth it." And he'd bowed the deep bow he reserved for genuine moments. Zoro had gone back to training the same afternoon they'd left, which was Zoro. Nami was at the chart table on the 3rd afternoon when she found the letter. It was under her barometer, placed with the precision of someone who knew her well enough to know that she checked the barometer before the log book and after the coffee, which was a very specific knowledge, written on a piece of paper that had been folded in thirds and labeled for the navigator in handwriting she didn't recognize at first, and then did. She recognized it because she'd seen it on the control structure at Murugain. The neat, angular hand of someone who had written technical documentation for years and whose personal correspondence had taken on the same precise economy as their professional work. She opened it. "You asked what I wanted," Vareth had written. "I want the world that comes after to be worth the cost of what it takes to get there. I've been wrong about the method. I'm not wrong about the goal. You have a crew that functions as you described, accountable, chosen, present. The Revolutionary Army does not have this. Neither did the Marines. Neither does anyone I can currently identify. Study that. Document it. Not because I'm asking you to, because it is the most important navigational data in the current era, and you are the only navigator I've met who would know what to do with it. The Chambers sent a signal 3 days ago. I don't know what receives it. Neither do you. But I think we've both been in this business long enough to trust the signal." She read it twice. Then she set it under the barometer again, carefully, in its original position. She picked up her pen. Opened a fresh page in her log. She didn't write about Vareth. She wrote about the crew, their movement through Murugain, the way the teams had distributed and communicated, the specific instances of judgment, course correction, response. She wrote it as navigational data because that was what it was, information about how they moved, how they held formation, how the components of this particular ship worked in relation to each other when the water was difficult. She wrote for 20 minutes. Then she closed the log and looked at the sea. Luffy had been unusually visible. This was not suspicious on its own. Luffy was generally visible, located by default in whichever part of the ship was currently most interesting, drawn to activity and noise and the presence of food or people who were doing something worth watching. But for 3 days he'd been visible specifically in relation to her, which was different. Not hovering, nothing as anxious as that. Just around. He'd sat on the railing near the chart table yesterday morning while she worked. Not talking. Eating something, looking at the sea, occasionally glancing at her chart with the pattern-reading attention she'd identified in Murugain, and which she still hadn't fully adjusted to. She'd worked. He'd sat. After an hour he'd left to do something loud and physical with Usopp. She'd kept working, and the absence of his presence had been a specific kind of noticing. He'd been at the bow this morning when she did her dawn check. She'd walked past him to reach the bowsprit, and he'd moved slightly to give her room, and their arms had almost touched, and neither of them had said anything, and the almost touching had registered in her nervous system with a clarity that she found simultaneously interesting and inconvenient. She was charting the mid-journey current variations. He was in her peripheral vision. She was very much not looking at him. "You're thinking very loudly," Robin said from her chair 2 meters away. Nami didn't look up. "I'm not thinking anything." "You've recalculated the same current 3 times," Robin said. Nami looked at her chart. The current notation was, in fact, written 3 times in the same column. She closed the log. "I don't know how to start," she said. Robin turned a page. "Start what?" The next part," Nami said. "After the confession. After Murugain. After everything is." She made a gesture that was imprecise but which Robin understood completely because Robin understood imprecise gestures about precise things. There was a crisis, and then there was the navigation of the crisis, and now the crisis is done, and there's just the thing. "The thing," Robin said. "The actual." Nami stopped. "You're making me say it." "I find it helpful," Robin said pleasantly. "The relationship," Nami said. "Or whatever it is. The whatever it is. The acknowledged thing that hasn't been given any structure yet." "And you need structure," Robin said. "I work better with charts." Robin was quiet for a moment, reading. Or appearing to read. The usual question. "I spent 30 years," Robin said, "afraid to want things because things could be taken. And then I joined this crew and slowly, without meaning to, I began to want things again. The island. The people. Specific mornings. Specific voices." She turned a page. "I didn't structure it. There was no chart for it. It just became true at some point, and I noticed it had become true, and I let it be true." She looked up. "The wanting is already there, Nami. It's been there for a long time. You don't need to build a structure around it. You just need to stop preventing it." Nami looked at the sea. "That's irritatingly simple," she said. "Most true things are," Robin said. Nami stood up. She closed her log fully, put the cap on her pen, and tucked both under her arm. She looked at the bow of the ship. Luffy was there. Of course he was there. She walked toward him. He heard her coming. She knew he did because he shifted slightly on the figurehead's base, making room, the unconscious accommodation of someone who has been expecting a person for a while and is glad they've arrived. She sat beside him on the base of the lion figurehead. Their shoulders were almost touching. The sea ahead was very blue and very large and entirely unhurried about anything. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "I found Veritha's letter," she said. "The one under the barometer?" She looked at him. "You knew about the letter." "He asked me if it was okay to leave it," Luffy said. "I said yes." "When?" "When I went back to talk to him. Before we left." He was looking at the horizon. "He's not a bad person." "No," she agreed. "He's not." She was quiet for a moment. "He told me to document how the crew works. As navigational data for whatever comes after. Will you?" "I already started," she said. He glanced at her, and the corner of his mouth moved. The sea went past them. A flying fish, the grand line variety, larger than the East blue ones, with wings that were genuinely wing-shaped and caught the light, leaped from the surface 20 meters ahead and described an arc that was briefly perfect and then was gone. "Luffy," she said. I need to tell you something." She was looking at the horizon. The navigator's default position, looking at what was ahead, reading the information in it, making decisions based on data. "When I said it, In the storm, I said the idiot part first. I need to tell you that the order wasn't accidental. He was quiet. I love you, she said. And you drive me genuinely insane about 11 times per day on average, and neither of those things has anything to do with the other, and both of them are completely true, and I'm telling you that specifically because She stopped. Found the thread again. I've been afraid of wanting things that could be taken. For most of my life. The way that people who love things get those things used against them. She looked at the sea. Arlong understood that. He understood it very well. And I spent a lot of years afterwards making sure I didn't give anyone anything to use. I know, Luffy said. I know you know, she said. But I want to say it out loud. Because the opposite of that isn't pretending not to be afraid. It's saying it while being afraid and doing it anyway. She turned and looked at him directly, the way she looked at charts when she needed them to be honest, fully, without the softening distance of peripheral vision. I'm not taking it back. The thing I said in the rain. I'm not taking any of it back. Luffy looked at her. He had an expression she was only now fully learning to read, had been learning it for years, in fact, in the incremental way you learn things that were important enough to take time with. The expression that was his most real one, the one with no performance in it, no grin, no deflection, just Luffy looking at something he cared about with the total attention he gave to everything he decided mattered. I don't want you to take it back, he said. Okay, she said. I meant what I said on the ship, he said. About you not being just my navigator. About knowing what it is and knowing it's mine. He was choosing words with the same deliberateness she'd seen on the figurehead that first morning, the care of someone for whom words were not automatic. I'm not good at the words for it. But I'm good at. He paused. I know what it feels like to have something that's yours. And I know the difference between that and everything else. He looked at her. You're mine. Not like I own you. Like you're part of what this is. The crew, the ship, where we're going. You're in all of that. You've always been in all of that. She looked at him. The sea moved between one moment and the next, carrying them forward as it always did, indifferent to chronology. You are also, she said carefully, the most chaotic, food-obsessed, structurally reckless person I have ever met in my life, and you stood on the bowsprit of my ship in a Grand Line storm and fell in the water and I didn't nearly, he said. You were sinking. I was sinking slowly, he said. There's a difference. There is not a difference that matters, she said. I'm made of rubber, he said. You can't swim. You jumped in, he said. Simply. Not as a point in his favor, as a statement of what had happened. As evidence. You jumped in and got me and brought us back. He was looking at her. You always bring us back. She opened her mouth. She closed it. That's not fair, she said finally. It's true, he said. She looked at the sea and felt something she didn't have a word for, doing something in her chest, not the tight braced thing from before, not the careful containment. Something warmer. Something that moved. She identified it, after a moment, as the specific feeling of being fully known by someone and not minding. More than not minding. Finding it, at the particular frequency it arrived in right now, a relief that went all the way down. Don't stand on the bowsprit in storms, she said. Okay, he said. She turned back to look at him. I mean it. I know you mean it, he said. If you do it again, I won't, he said. And then, probably. Luffy. Definitely probably, he said. She stared at him. He grinned, the real one, the full one, the one she had first seen years ago in a bar in a town that Arlong owned and which had been, she understood now with the benefit of time and distance, the specific moment something began that had been ongoing ever since. She laughed. It came out before she could do anything with it, not the polite navigational laugh she used for crew management purposes, not the sharp exhale of someone dealing with impossible people, but an actual laugh, the kind that meant something had gotten through every layer of her professional competence, and reached the real person underneath. He was still grinning. "You're impossible," she said. "Yeah," he said, with perfect contentment. She was still smiling when she looked back at the sea. The smile settled into something quieter and stayed there. Either of them moved. Their shoulders were touching now. At some point, either of them had tracked exactly when the almost touching had become touching, and neither of them had made a thing of it, and it was the most natural progression of anything she had experienced in recent memory. The sun moved under them. The sea was blue. Ahead, somewhere at the edge of their sight line, something was beginning to emerge from the horizon, not the island yet, too early for that, but the particular quality of the air above where an island would be, the slight thickening of the atmosphere that you learned to read from a deck if you paid enough attention. She was paying attention. 30 hours, she said. To the next island? Maybe less. The current's good. What do you think it's like? He said. She studied the horizon. Big. There's significant magnetic signature in the log pose, and the air above it suggests elevation, mountains, maybe, or a large plateau. The barometric reading this morning had a particular pattern I associate with islands that have complex weather systems, which means we'll see variety. She was reading the data as she spoke, building the picture in real time. Inhabited, almost certainly. Busy, probably. We're at a major current junction, which means trade traffic. Food? He said. She closed her eyes. Opened them. Yes, Luffy. Almost certainly food. Good, he said, with the serene priority ordering that was one of his most consistent features. She shook her head, but she was still smiling, and the smile was still the real one, and he was still beside her, and the island was ahead, and the sea was the sea. The tarp on the rear deck came off that evening. Frankie had apparently spent 3 days building a weather display system, a combination of his own engineering and the electromagnetic sensor he'd adapted from Nami's specifications, producing a device that mounted on the stern rail and gave a continuous visual readout of barometric pressure, wind speed, and the particular electromagnetic variations that Nami used to anticipate Grand Line weather phenomena. He presented it at dinner. With considerable theatrical flourish, a rollback of the tarp accompanied by his personal musical sting that he provided vocally because the situation seemed to call for it. The display was, she had to admit, genuinely excellent. Compact, readable, built to survive rough weather, calibrated against her existing instruments with an accuracy that suggested he'd been cross-referencing her logbook data. She looked at it for a long time. Frankie, she said. Super? He said, with the hopefulness of someone presenting work they cared about. This is super, she confirmed. He produced the sound of fireworks with his mouth. Usopp applauded. Chopper applauded without being entirely sure what he was applauding, which was his standard approach to Frankie presentations. Does it have a name? Robin asked. The Nami one, Frankie said in the tone of someone who had thought about this for approximately 3 days. Nami looked at him. It's a weather instrument, he said. Named for the navigator. Obviously. Nami means wave, Brooke offered. In the old language? Yo-ho-ho-ho, the poetry of it, it does mean wave, Nami said. She looked at Frankie. Thank you? Don't mention it, he said. She looked at the device again. At the readings already updating, the display registering the current conditions with the small precise movements of something calibrated correctly, doing its job. She looked at the number that corresponded to the electromagnetic variation she'd been tracking since yesterday, a slight anomaly she hadn't fully identified yet, and she reached out and tapped it with one finger. This reading here? She said to Frankie. What about it? It's been present since yesterday morning. Low amplitude consistent. Not a weather system. She looked at the horizon, then at the reading, then at the horizon again. It's directional. Coming from about 15 degrees north of our current heading. Frankie leaned in. What does that mean? I don't know yet, she said. That's why it's interesting. Is it a problem? Usopp asked from across the table. Probably not, she said. But I'll track it overnight. She looked back at the display. It might be the island's magnetic signature bleeding out at range. Or it might be something else. Something else like what? Chopper said. Like something we haven't encountered before, Nami said. Oh, Chopper said. Great. That's great. On this sea, Robin said. That's Tuesday. It's Wednesday, Usopp said. Philosophically Tuesday, Robin said. The dinner continued. Sanji had made something extraordinary. He'd been restoring himself to his usual register over the past 2 days, the crisis cooking transitioning back toward his normal register, and tonight's meal had the quality of someone who had processed what they needed to process and returned to the table as themselves. Nami ate with the appetite of someone who had been running on navigational adrenaline for 3 days and was now on the other side of it. Luffy ate 4 portions and asked for a 5th, and Sanji said no, and Luffy said yes, and Sanji said absolutely not, and Luffy said please, and Sanji said, after a pause that was slightly longer than his usual resistance pause, fine. Usopp looked at Zoro. Zoro looked at his food. Something passed between them that didn't require words. Nami looked at the Nami 1 display visible through the galley window, still reading, still tracking the slight anomaly from the north. She made a mental note. She'd check it at midnight. Midnight came clear and cool. She had the deck to herself. Zoro was somewhere in the rigging, audibly asleep based on the specific quality of silence from that direction, and Brook had finished his evening playing and gone below, and the rest of the crew was distributed across their bunks in the varying configurations of people who were genuinely tired and had genuinely earned it. She sat at the helm with her log open and checked the Nami 1 display first thing. The anomaly had strengthened. Not alarmingly, it had moved from low amplitude to moderate, still directional, still from the north-northeast. She ran the numbers. Cross-referenced with her chart. The heading: it was coming from passed through open water, no documented islands in that direction on any of her charts, and the signal characteristics were different from anything she had prior reference data for. She looked at it for a long time. Different from anything in her reference data. On the Grand Line. After an island where they'd activated a 2,000-year-old broadcast signal built by a civilization that understood frequencies no modern navigator had been trained to interpret. She looked at the night sky. She wrote in her log, anomalous electromagnetic signal, NE, moderate and rising. Origin unknown. Association with Murugain broadcast, possible. Monitoring continues. No course change recommended at this time. She read what she'd written. Then she added a line, unknown variables are not threats by default. Monitor, document, adjust if required. The pen made a soft sound against the paper. Footsteps behind her, she knew them. You're supposed to be asleep, she said. Luffy said. He came and sat on the deck beside the helm, which was not where people sat when they were managing a ship but was where he sat when he was keeping her company and had no interest in managing anything, which was characteristic. His back was against the helm housing and his head was tilted back to look at the stars, and he was making no particular effort to do anything except exist in the place he'd chosen. There's an anomaly in the electromagnetic reading, she said. From the island? Maybe. I don't know yet. Are you worried? She looked at the Nami 1 display. At the steady moderate reading from the north-northeast, patient and consistent, doing whatever it was doing in the dark water out there. No, she said. And found, checking this internally, that it was true. Curious. Good kind or bad kind? He said. I don't know yet, she said. That's the interesting part. He made a sound that might have been agreement, or might have been the beginning of sleep. With Luffy these were sometimes indistinguishable. She looked at the stars for a moment, the same stars she'd been looking at from this deck for 2 years, the Grand Line's particular star map, which was different from the East Blue stars and which she'd spent the first 6 months memorizing and which felt now as natural as any sky she'd ever navigated under. Can I ask you something? She said. He said. Awake. When you said on the island in the library with Vareth, you said the sea doesn't take things from you anymore. She was looking at the helm, not at him. What did you mean by any more? He was quiet for a moment. Before, he said, there were things I couldn't hold on to. Sabo. Ace. He said their names plainly, the way he said everything that mattered, without softening, without avoidance, because softening and avoidance were things you did with feelings you hadn't decided what to do with, and he had decided. They got taken and I couldn't do anything about it. She was listening. But now, he said, I'm stronger. Not just muscles. Everything. And the crew is stronger. And we know more. And I don't go into things unprepared the way I used to. He paused. I'm not saying nothing bad will ever happen. I know something bad will happen. This sea. He gestured, and the gesture meant the Grand Line and the new world beyond it, and all the water in between and everything waiting in it. But I'm not going to lose people the same way. Because I know more and I'm more and the crew is more. He tilted his head back further, looking at the stars. So when I said that, I meant it. The sea doesn't take things from me anymore. Because I won't let it. She looked at him. At the absolute, grounded, unperformative certainty of him. Not arrogance. Arrogance was a claim made against doubt. This was something entirely without doubt, something settled so deep it had become structural, the load-bearing element that everything else rested on. She thought about what Frankie had said on the deck days ago. You learn to recognize when something is load-bearing. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. I believe you, she said. He looked at her. The moonlight was doing something direct and specific to the deck between them, and his face in it was the face she'd spent years learning without meaning to, every version of it, the grin and the stillness and the fury and the grief, and now this, the quiet certain thing at midnight with the stars out, and the sea gentle and the anomaly from the north-northeast doing its slow, patient work. Nami, he said. I'm going to be king of the pirates, he said. I know, she said. The road there, he said, and stopped, and she could feel him building towards something in the careful way he did when words were important enough to go slowly. The road there is going to be everything. More bad things. More islands like that one. More Variths and worse than Variths. More times when the sea tries to take something. He was looking at her. I need you to know I know that. I'm not pretending any of it away. I know you're not, she said. I need you on the road, he said. Not just. He stopped. Tried again. Not just as my navigator. I need. He looked at his hands, then back at her. I don't know all the right words. But I know what I need. And it's this. Here. You. The helm was very still. She looked at him for a long moment. The sea moved beneath them and the stars were overhead, and somewhere in the north-northeast something was broadcasting a signal she hadn't identified yet, and the next island was coming up over the horizon in about 28 hours, and the Grand Line was the Grand Line, and there was no version of this that was simple or safe or guaranteed. She thought about her mother. About Belmere standing in a doorway with her hand on her hip and her mouth doing the thing it did when she decided something and wasn't going to be moved. About what it had cost her, the decision to stand in front of Arlong instead of beside him. About what it had meant. About the difference between keeping something safe and keeping something contained. Then I'm on the road, she said. He looked at her. She looked back at him. Not, she said. As in I will navigate while you do things. As in, you said we're going together. I want that. Actually want it. Not as a condition of employment. She held his gaze steadily. Do you understand the difference? Yes, he said immediately, the way he responded to things he'd already done all the necessary thinking about. That's what I wanted you to say. I know it's what you wanted, she said. Then why did it take so long? He said, with the complete genuine puzzlement of someone who had been waiting patiently for something that seemed obvious to him. She stared at him. I'm going to push you off this ship, she said. You won't, he said. I will absolutely push you, you won't, he said, grinning. Because you just said you want to go together, and that would be a very fast contradiction, Luffy, and also I'd bounce back, Luffy. And also, he said, and his voice shifted, dropped into the quiet register, the real one. I'd always come back. The laughter she'd been about to deploy stayed where it was. She looked at him. At the directness of him. At the total absence of anything in his face except what was actually there. I know you would, she said. They were quiet for a while. She went back to her instruments. Checked the heading. Checked the anomaly reading, still moderate, still north-northeast, still patient. Made her midnight log notation. Ran the current calculation and confirmed the 28-hour ETA. Luffy sat beside the helm and didn't go anywhere. After a while she said, "Do you want to know something about the next island?" "Yeah," he said. "The magnetic signature in the log pose has been getting stronger all day," she said. "More than the distance should account for. Which usually means the island is dense, geologically unusual, probably. Volcanic, maybe, or mineral-rich in a way that produces significant electromagnetic variation." She was looking at her chart as she spoke. Dense islands on the Grand Line usually have ecosystems that don't exist anywhere else. Plants, animals, resources that the density of the island's core produces in ways we can't predict from standard reference data. Interesting, he said. Probably genuinely interesting, she said. Which on this sea means also probably dangerous. Also genuinely interesting, he said. She shook her head. She was smiling again. She'd been smiling a lot over the past 24 hours in a way that she found she didn't have any particular objection to. "Go to sleep," she said. "In a while," he said. She sailed. He sat. The anomaly held steady from the north-northeast, and the island came closer by the measure of 28 hours, and the Thousand Sunny moved through the clear blue dark with everyone she was built to carry aboard her, the crew of her, the weight of them distributed exactly right across her hull, making her sit in the water as she was designed to sit, full, balanced, going somewhere. Dawn came up over the Grand Line. She'd been awake to watch it, which she often was. The specific light of first sunrise over open water was one of those things she had documented in her log on many mornings and would never feel she'd fully documented, because the light changed every time in ways that her notations couldn't entirely capture, and she kept trying anyway. This morning the sky went orange first, then pink, then the clean gold that meant a clear day ahead. The anomaly from the north-northeast was visible in the Nami 1 display, stronger now. She'd have to revise her assessment in the morning briefing. It had moved from moderate to significant overnight, still non-threatening in character but definitely present, definitely consistent, definitely worth watching. She heard the crew coming to life below. Sanji's coffee, exactly on schedule. Frankie's exercises. Brooks' violin, something new this morning, something she hadn't heard before, something rising in it that she didn't have a word for. Luffy had gone below an hour ago, when she told him a second time to sleep, and he'd actually gone, because there was a difference between the times he didn't listen and the times he did, and she'd learned to read which was which. The sun cleared the horizon. The sea ahead was gold and blue, and the island was just visible now. She'd seen it first about 20 minutes ago, the faint suggestion of elevation on the horizon, thickening with the light, becoming more real. Tall. There was height to it that she could see even at this distance, which confirmed the geological density her instruments had suggested. She looked at it. She thought about what was going to be on it, the unknown variables, the things she couldn't chart in advance, the people and events and choices that the Grand Line would produce, because the Grand Line was the Grand Line and it never ran out of those. She thought about Veritha's letter under the barometer. About the signal traveling through stone and sea floor towards something that had received the Murin 2,000 years ago and might, or might not receive the Straw Hat's accidental echo now. About pending things resolved and concluded things and what the difference was between them. She thought about a storm and a rope and falling water and two words said in a gap between gusts that had been true for longer than she'd said them. She looked at the island ahead. She looked at her chart. She wrote the time and their coordinates, and the island's first visual confirmation and the ETA she'd revised to 21 hours, And then she looked at what she'd written and added one more line that she didn't usually include in navigational logs because logs were for data and this wasn't data exactly, it was something else. Heading somewhere worth going. Crew intact. All readings favorable. She capped the pen. Luffy appeared on deck with his straw hat on, and his face still slightly soft from sleep and a piece of bread in his hand that he'd clearly taken directly from wherever Sanji stored the morning prep, which Sanji was going to have opinions about. He came and stood beside her at the helm. Looked at the island. There it is, he said. There it is, she agreed. Looks good, he said. You can't tell anything from this distance, she said. Still looks good, he said. She looked at the island. She looked at her instruments. She looked at the anomaly reading, steady and patient from the north-northeast, doing whatever it was doing out there in the dark water, some signal received or some signal sent or some third thing she hadn't named yet. She put her hand on the wheel. Ready? She said. He looked at her with the full grin, the real one, the one that had been the beginning of something neither of them had been entirely prepared for, and which had turned out, she was finding, to be exactly the right thing to be unprepared for. Always, he said. She brought the sunny around 2 degrees and the sails took the morning wind and the island grew on the horizon as islands did when you were heading directly for them, steadily, certainly, patient as everything that waited to be found, and the crew came to life around them in the specific, irreplaceable way that this crew came to life, and the sea was the sea, and the Grand Line went on ahead of them without end, and they went with it. On a deserted island, a former admiral sat in a library of empty shelves and rebuilt his model from the ground up, starting from a different premise. In the north-northeast, a signal moved through water at a frequency the Murin had spent 2,000 years perfecting, looking for what had answered them before. And on the Thousand Sunny, the navigator made her notation, closed her log, and sailed toward the next thing. Which was, as it turned out, worth going toward. They always were.